Okay, we've got open mic and our first registrant is Craig Havildson. Craig, are you there?
What's the number?
I'm here, yep.
Craig, are you there? Okay, we're going to go to Alana Beaver. Okay, then we will have Ms. Hanks and Ms. Pierce. Welcome. Just make sure you're talking right into the mic, please.
Is it on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. We just kind of wanted to come and do a quick little kind of encampment update, just as some things have changed. So for the last at least 6 weeks, Jesse and I have been going close to daily to the encampment behind Walmart. So up until last Friday, we personally have been ensuring access to meals, warm clothing, over-the-counter medical supplies for people with wounds that needed to be cleaned, stuff like saline and bandages, Band-Aids. Water, we've been making sure they had water, firewood, just the basic things that they needed to kind of, we've been doing this entirely with community donations, just pulling out whatever magic we could just to make sure that they were relatively comfortable. We built relationships with the people there, never made promises we couldn't keep. We even ended up helping a lady move from camp into an apartment. I guess, okay, well, last Wednesday, we were asked to work in tandem with Samson Community Wellness to help distribute funds allocated by FCSS to the encampment. So until the shelters are in place, the camp will, going forward, be sufficiently provided for.
So appropriate winter clothing, adequate firewood, water, laundry money, showers. Their basic needs will be met. What does that say?
I told you you wouldn't be able to read it.
Oh, we wanted council to be aware that the camp is prepared and has the resources to get through the coming days before the opening of the shelter. We also wanted to thank FCSS for allowing us to help distribute these funds and for trusting us to fulfill the needs of the encampment. And we also wanted to express gratitude from the campers themselves for being able to be helped in this manner by us. So thank you very much, FCSS.
That's all we wanted to
That's
say.
our update.
Thank you very much. And I know that you guys have been working a lot at the shelter or at the encampment, and it's very much appreciated in the time and the effort that you're putting in there to make sure that clothes are being distributed, wood's getting to them, food and water, all of that. So I really appreciate the work that you ladies are doing. Thank you.
You're very, very welcome. If you guys have any questions ever, you can always reach out to Nat and myself.
Yep, and
Thank you.
we'll get together and meet this week if you guys are available.
Yes, absolutely. Please and thank you.
Thank you. Is Ilana Beaver online? Nope. Okay. All right, we will close the open mic. I will look for an adoption of the agenda. Item 3.
If Lainey Beaver isn't online, I can speak on her behalf.
Sure, go ahead, Craig.
I think rushing through these things, people have a bit of technical difficulties, so I know she was signing on here. In regards to an update at the camp, I've been messaging FCSS regarding how the outreach services have been pulled and how they're currently being delivered. As of the 15th, the professionals have been pulled from the site. There's no longer counselors. There's no longer people with naloxone training, first aid training, access to medical, and these concerns have been unmet. The continued inspections of the camp go without, the tents are damaged, the people are cold, the wood in the tanks are insufficient. The need for an external shelter out there is extremely pressing. And the Coalition for Justice and Human Rights addressed a letter on November 17th, 2021 to Tyler Gandam, Mayor, City of Wetaskiwin. The Coalition for Justice and Human Rights is an association of professionals and community members committed to human rights and justice. The coalition was built in an effort to respond to the increasing number of complaints on human rights issues that were arising from agencies in the community and to create a network of individuals with the capacity to support and respond. Over the past weeks, we have received a number of complaints and concerns from members of Wetaskiwin community regarding the lack of action from City Council to address the need of the members of the community who live without a house as a violation of basic human rights. Article 25 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and of his family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care, and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control. The closing of the original shelter without any plans to address this gap on basic housing and basic food to the most vulnerable in our community has put these members and the rest of the community at risk. The coalition members are concerned that the City of Wetaskiwin Council meeting are focused on security issues that are allegedly caused by the camp rather than creating an urgent and dignified solution to this housing crisis of having people who had no alternative but to live at a makeshift camping grounds located in the parking lot of Rock Soup Greenhouse and Food Bank, and now Walmart. The current situation is dire as people have died since the start of this crisis. The hostility and animosity from the local community has also further endangered the safety and security of the people deprived of housing. As threats of extreme violence and racism have been displayed at the camping grounds and in an effort to drive the mostly Indigenous people deprived of housing anyway. There have been reports of harassment and physical assaults on the people in the camp from others from the broader community. The coalition and members of the Wetaskiwin community are hoping that in the City Council meeting scheduled on November 22nd, 2021, the members of council find an effective and prompt solution to the housing crisis that threatens the life, dignity, and security of people without housing in the community that you swear to serve. The mayor and city council members have had since August 9th of 2021 to find a place and create the conditions to support the most marginalized members of this community. We are disappointed in the lack of response from the city council and also concerned about the exclusion of Open Door Association as an organization that has been connected and working directly with this community and who ran the previous shelter being shut out of the work and conversations. The bringing in of external organization, the mustard seed, we do not believe was the appropriate response, and the city should be working in collaboration with local groups that are actively doing this work, and we call for an urgent action on this issue. The current proposal on the table for a shelter of 18 people does not address the reality that there are 25 to 30 daily change people in the camp at the moment. By not addressing this issue in a holistic and supportive lens, we are creating a long-term cost for the community. Any approach should also be done in collaboration with the surrounding First Nation communities. We humbly request the opportunity to host a meeting, inviting yourself and other members of this community to have a frank and honest conversation about the situation and how we can collectively work together to address the needs of those that are most marginalized and traditionally oppressed in the community. Our experience has shown us that when third-party facilitators come in and hold space, it can be more constructive and productive in finding solutions. Please email the coalition at coalitionforjhr.org or call 885-468-2483 to confirm a time and date that meets your needs. Please note we have attached the relevant calls of action from the Truth and Reconciliation and Commission report the city should be relating and referring to as we do this work. Thank you.
Thanks for your time. Ilana Beaver, did you want to speak as well?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, City Council and Mayor. So my name is Alana Beaver. My preferred name is Lainey. I am a MacEwan University student in the Child and Youth Care Program, and I am a part of this coalition. I just wanted to state what had happened yesterday. So on Sunday, November 21st, a team of volunteers and advocates traveled to Wetaskiwin, where we accommodated by the staff of the Rock Soup Greenhouse and Food Bank, the executive director of Rock Soup, Craig, then transported members from the encampment, where they have been living behind the parking lot of Walmart at a makeshift campgrounds to the Rock Soup facility, where the team then interviewed 9 people and drafted human rights complaints. The complaints were made upon the grounds of discrimination based on racism, place of origin, homelessness. The interviews revealed that there have been repeated incidents of racism and discrimination towards the people of the encampment by the community of Wetaskiwin and the unfair treatment of them by the RCMP. The interviews further revealed that there is an immediate and urgent need to provide the people at the encampment with help and access to basic necessities so they may live with dignity. They are in desperate need of shelter, access to sanitary facilities such as showers and toilets, basic food, clothing, and medical care. Their morale and mental frame of mind are extremely low, and they have suffered extreme psychological and emotional distress due to the treatment by the community and the RCMP. I request that through the chair that council vote to add an update about the encampment to the agenda. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Lainey. Excuse me. Thanks, Lainey. Sure. Who's that? Hilson. Leanne, are you on the line?
Hello, yes, I am.
Go ahead.
Thanks for letting me on the speaker list. I understand that there is additional funding that's been granted to the city by the province for shelter needs. I'm wondering, I know that there is a temporary shelter in place at this time, and I'm wondering what the city plans to do in terms of addressing the long-term need for a permanent shelter and transitional housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Open mic is now closed. We'll move to number 3, adoption of the agenda. Sue, go ahead.
Could we add in 2020 audited financials, please?
Were there 3 separate?
No,
Or
one of them is
no?
for the next meeting and the other one may be an in-camera piece, depending on questions from council.
So we'll move that as 7E. 7E will be 2020 audited financials. Anything else? Looking for an adoption of the agenda as amended.
So moved.
Councillor Billingsley, ready for the question? Those in favor? Carried. Item 4A, regular council meeting minutes, November 8th, 2021.
I move that city council approve the regular council meeting minutes, November 8th, 2021.
Moved by Councillor Lonsdale. Any errors or omissions? Ready for the question? Those in favor? Carried.
I move that city council approve the special council meeting minutes of November 12th, 2021.
Moved by Councillor Lonsdale. Any errors or omissions? Ready for the question? Those in favor? Carried. Item 5A, council committee reports and attendance.
I move that that council accepts this report as information. Mr. Mayor, and I would just like to add that part of the report that I submitted was from AUMA. And I would like to congratulate Mayor Tyler Gandam on being elected as Vice President of Urban Municipalities.
Thank you. Anything else you would like to add as a part of your report? Anything you'd like to speak to? Councillor Billingsley? Is your mic on?
But I would like to report on my last meeting with the CEC. Entry has been put in for the Festival of Trees that was set up this morning. Thank you to the volunteers for that. You'll probably notice tonight, or maybe notice last night, that City Hall should be lit up and ready to go. And in case you didn't know, there will be no winter warm-up this year. So I'm not sure if I had mentioned that before, but that will not be happening. Also attended the last library board meeting. Not much was discussed other than they are looking at a security system with cameras to replace an outdated existing system.
Councillor Lonsdale? Good. Councillor Aberley?
Thank you. I attended the organizational training, strategic planning, no outside activities that I did as a counselor.
Councillor Nielsen?
Thank you, Your Worship. As all counselors, I attended all the orientation sessions. Also attended my first FCSS meeting, which ended up being more of an orientation for me. And coming to understand some of the struggles that they're experiencing as they come under the governance of a new board. And so I found that rather interesting. Thank you.
Good. Councillor Blatz?
So with everyone else, I attended the orientation and all the training that we had to attend. I also went to No Stone Left Alone, and that was a great turnout. There was a lot of people there, a lot of kids that were there, and it was really great to see. Also, the Remembrance Day Ceremony was also really, really well done, especially considering we didn't really do much of this in person last year. So it's nice to see everybody again. And I've been at AUMA for the past week and attended some sessions on green energy and all the grants that are out there. And I also attended the session that Mayor Gandam and Chief Randy Erminskin put together for talking about increasing Indigenous relations in your community. And it was absolutely wonderful and well done. And there was a standing ovation at the end. So it was really nice to see, especially because we are very lucky in our community to have those relationships being built with our neighboring communities that a lot of people don't get to see. So.
Good, thank you. No Stone Left Alone, as well as Remembrance Day Ceremony. Both were well attended, and I'd like to extend my thanks to the Heritage Museum for making sure that happened this year, and then to all of the service groups, families, everybody who came to No Stone Left Alone and made sure that many hands made light work in placing poppies on all of the headstones of our veterans. And to all of the volunteers the week before who went out and placed flags at all of the headstones too, to make sure that it was easy for us to find along the way. Also very grateful that we didn't have a foot of snow to contend with while we were placing said poppies. The Remembrance Day ceremony went really well. And then we did a wreath laying ceremony at the cenotaph following that, which was pretty powerful as well. I had the opportunity to meet with a number of ministers over the last month, both expressing our concern and raising awareness for the issues that we have here, especially while we're struggling with our vulnerable population and homeless population not having adequate shelter. I had done a couple of interviews as well through Global CTV. Again, sharing our concern and making sure that the province knows where we're standing in terms of the support that we need to continue that help. And then, yeah, last week at Alberta Municipalities Annual Convention, having the opportunity to meet with a number of ministers there, both personally and professionally, to make sure that we're maintaining those relationships. And when we do have the needs or the wants and we go there to ask, it's not just a cold call, that they know who we are and why we need the support, and that we've been doing everything that we possibly can as a municipality to address some of the issues that we have here in the community. So with that, ready for the question? Those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Item 6A, we're going in camera under section 29. So I will entertain a motion to go in camera. Councillor Blatz, those in favor? Carried. Thank you. I'll entertain a motion to come out of camera. Moved by Councillor Blatz. Those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Item 7A, Santa Claus Parade Road Closure. Welcome, Chief.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Today we're here looking for a request for decision to get council's approval to shut down Main Street on November 26th for the annual Santa Claus Parade. Our time frame we're looking at this is going to be between 5:30 to 7:30 to allow for the barricades to go up, the parade, and then the cleanup. So traditionally, this has been an annual event between the fire department, the city, and of course, the other organizations, starting off with the winter warm up. Unfortunately, I know that's not taking place this year. And with the exception of 2020, when our annual parade down Main Street hadn't taken place, we are hopeful to get back into this at least for 2021 and try and provide some normalcy to the city. We do have the parade committee that's been working on this, and I know that the request is coming in a little later than actually hoped for. Unfortunately, waiting to see what the province was going to put out for restrictions was definitely a hindrance to see what we could do. But we did look and we did some research and found other communities within the province that are still hosting their parades. So the committee got together and picked a date of November 26th. So in addition to the request for approval, we did include a hazard assessment to go along with this as well, just to show that we are doing our due diligence, not only as the fire department, but doing this as the city as well, to make sure, when we go out and do this, we're doing it as safely as possible. I will be honest, this is the first time I've ever had to do a hazard assessment for a parade, so it was quite unique. But with the parade, it's going to lead into a couple other small events that we're hoping to hold as well. So on the 27th, we're doing a fill a fire truck to try and raise enough toy donations for the less fortunate children in the community. So this is the kickoff to that for Christmas time. So today we are here seeking council's approval to have Main Street for 2 hours on November 26th.
Councillor Blatz.
I move that council approves the road closure request as per the report titled Santa Claus Parade Road Closure dated November 22nd, 2021 for the annual Santa Claus Parade.
Moved by Counselor Blatz. Any discussion? Counselor Billingsley.
Through the mayor to the chief, how are you going to make sure that the attendees follow AHS's guidelines? Like, I see that you've got notice to parade attendees, but how are you going to ensure that they follow it?
So this is where we are going to be relying on our communications department as well to make sure that when we post this out again, that the restrictions from Alberta Health are also included with that as well, just to make sure that, and I know we can't control everybody, and I know that's going to be a concern. But we can do the best we can do and just provide that information to them and say, you know what, let's do this. So you know what, 2022, if we're in the same situation, we can do this again. It is going to take some community involvement just to understand the restrictions. And, you know, we're going to be putting faith into them as well to that they follow those as well. So we can make this a success.
So you're not, in other words, there is no private security making sure.
We
there's-
don't have, no
So
private
you-
security.
So it's beforehand saying, these are the rules, but if they choose not to follow them, the parade still goes on.
And I do see where you're coming from on that, of course, down the sidewalks and whatnot.
Correct.
Honestly, yeah, we did not look into the private security to make sure that would happen. We are just really hoping that our community, when we put this out, comes together with us and follows these restrictions as set out by the government.
And it's no different than Joe Public or family Joe Public walking through the mall or walking down the street. If all of a sudden 500 people decided to go for a walk down Main Street or on our trail system, it's still up to each individual to maintain that social distancing as per AHS. Municipality, regardless of the event going on, wouldn't be able to say, 6 feet and have a couple of meter sticks to put between them, no different than malls or anything else going on. So I understand the concern, but in no way in a public space can a municipality ensure that people are public or social distancing, and if they're not, that they're wearing a mask as well, because that's part of the mandate too. When you can't social distance, that a mask is mandatory.
But the city is putting on an event,
Right.
right? This isn't just a walk in the park.
Yeah. Councillor Aberley, or sorry, I have Councillor Elliott and Councillor Aberley.
Thank you. From the mayor through to the chief. Where will the fire truck be for fill a truck when you are going to fill it with toys?
So we've secured part of the fire lane. Fire trucks are allowed in there, so that was the good news. At Walmart, so we've made arrangements with Walmart to stage a fire truck there from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. on November 27th to help raise these donations.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councillor Aberley.
Thank you. Through the chair to the chief, the plan is to have multiple businesses and multiple organizations as in previous years?
That's correct. With the one exception is we're trying to have more of the participants in the parade in vehicles rather than just doing the walking. We're not going to be distributing candies or anything like that. We just want to keep all that into a more responsible parade this year. So that's the intent of it this year, is just get out, show some, good community pride. And for food and toy donations this year during the parade, we're actually going to be staging a trailer where the folks that have the donations can drop it off there and then really reduce those points of contact as much as possible.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Councillor Nielsen.
Through the chair to Sue. Because I share same concerns as Councillor Billingsley in the sense that the city is endorsing, sponsoring, whatever you want to call it, a public outdoor event, but not putting any safety restrictions in place other than asking people to comply. And so in the event, I guess I'm concerned that in the event that someone became ill as a result of attending a function that the city put on, would we bear any additional liability?
Through the chair to Councillor Nielsen, there is a fine line between the city and a social club event. And so the firefighters parade is actually put on by the fire department social club. It is not a city-run event. However, I understand the perception would be that the city is putting on the event, which is why we made Chief Wilkinson run through the risk assessment. We looked at legislation and there's really nothing for us to say, no, this can't happen. And so then they provided this risk assessment as part of the due diligence, I guess, to do that. And obviously the communications would be pretty heavily on, you know, keep the distance.
And I don't mean to be facetious. I recognize the line you're drawing here. But if a community organization said, can I close down Main Street to hold a dance? The fact that we would sanction the event, does that make us complicit on any level?
Through the chair to Councillor Nielsen, we are liable for almost everything that happens in the city. So, you know, would we be named in something? Absolutely, we would be. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I went to a soccer game last week in Edmonton with 44,000 people. And once you got in your seat, you could take off your mask. And if you were drinking, if you're having a drink, you could take off your mask. And I can't see the city of Edmonton being liable if somebody got sick. So I think we should embrace that the fire department social club is putting on a parade and just enjoy it. And if people are worried about getting sick, then they should maybe not take part in being a spectator at the parade.
Anything else? Ready for the question? Those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Thank you for your time today, Mr. Mayor and Council.
Item 7B, Archives Assessment, Final Report and Presentation.
Good evening, members of council. I am with you here this evening to present, introduce our consultants and present some legislative history here on the Archives Assessment. Last year, almost a year, just over a year to today, on November 9th, Wetaskiwin City Council confirmed that it would undertake a review of its archives upon hearing of the resignation of the previous archivist. On November 9th, the motion was moved the council directed administration to temporarily close the archives for up to 1 year and examine the current portfolio and assets of the city of Wetaskiwin Archives. Administration was to come back with a report by the end of Q2 2021. Upon the direction from council last year, administration engaged the Archive Society of Alberta approximately mid-December 2020 and was directed to an archives professional in Canada with over 35 years experience in both records, archives, and information management. Administration had multiple discussions with the consultant. Unfortunately, the archives professional was unable to support the project, but did help administration in drafting a project plan. This project plan was, this initial project plan was initially presented to the Committee of the Whole on March 22nd, 2021. In engaging Myers Norris Penny, which is the consultant here in front of you this evening, administration revised that draft project plan, and on April 26th, we brought a revised project plan to committee for feedback. The committee provided some feedback during that meeting, and it helped our administration move forward with the project. Specifically, committee had said, we hope that this project will ensure that the archives is operating efficiently. We will hope that there's a better understanding of how other municipalities are using their archives, that the recommendations on the best types of archives for the community, how it should be governed, and a clear roadmap would be provided on how to best move forward with the function, and that a review would provide recommendations on how we can better manage the archives moving forward. So as mentioned, administration has engaged Myers Norris Penny, MNP, who's with us this evening, to undertake an archives assessment to review the current state of the archives and community needs to help guide the process. The project team for this project consisted of both MNP and through MNP, they subcontracted to an archives professional out of Ontario, Heritage Professionals, who are also here with us this evening. MNP was in charge of the overall project implementation and management, stakeholder engagement and analysis. Heritage Professionals, the archives consultant, provide the expertise and focused on the professional archival review. Both the presentation and the report from those consultants have been provided to you this evening, and I won't go through the findings summary and recommendation summary provided in the RFD, but would rather ask that MNP join us here to present. Just before, as they're getting set up, I do want to talk about next steps and what administration is looking for from council this evening. Administration is looking for direction from council on which options require further analysis to better understand the total impacts to both the city and broader community in order to better prepare council on any future decisions regarding the archives function. We should note that MNP will be presenting 3 options for consideration this evening, and administration is looking for direction on which of those 3 would require further analysis. Specifically, detailed analysis of the financial, legal, program, and organizational impacts required to proceed with council's preferred option for the archives. That report would come back to council by the end of Q2 2022. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce consultants here with MNP, who will introduce themselves here shortly.
Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you.
There we go. I think it's on now. All right, and we just let you know when we need to move from slide to slide. Perfect. Thank you for the opportunity to work with the city of Wetaskiwin. It's been a fascinating journey over the last 6 months or so, and we'll be talking about our work with the archives at the city of Wetaskiwin. But first, congratulations to the new councillor and mayor on their election wins recently. And I bet you're all glad that those are done. Our agenda today, we're going to walk through quick introduction of the team. Then Reese is going to walk through an overview of municipal archives. And we're going to talk a bit about the specifics of the city of Wetaskiwin's archives and where the current state. We're then going to talk about 3 scenarios and what those scenarios look like and how we assessed each one of them and the options that you can look at as you're moving forward. And hopefully we'll take about 20 minutes or so to do this, and then we'll open up for questions that you may have regarding the rest of the work that we have. So if you could move a couple of slides down, just to introduce our team. We started in late May, early June, and one of the things we started with was lots of interviews, and Jing Jing in particular made a visit out here in person, and Ellen was actually on FaceTime doing that tour of the archives here and a number of facilities. So we did get out and see it as well. And Jing Jing, as our senior consultant, has done a lot of the work on this project throughout. Landon did a ton of the research and the financial work on it. And Landon is also, they're up in the small screen there on your screen somewhere in the corner. And then finally, Dr. Ellen Scheinberg was our subject matter expert and comes as with Heritage Professionals as Paul mentioned, and she provided subject matter expertise, and you'll also, and Reese will talk about the appendix to the report where her full report is in what the materials that you have. One of the last things and Reese, he'll talk about it later, it was the project manager for this and the other review you're going to hear about tonight that M&P did, and help make sure that we were all on the same page and moving along over the last 6 months. Last thing I want to say in introduction was about sorry, I haven't done too many of these in person, so I'm not used to actually speaking with one of these masks on. It's quite, I would have picked a different mask if I'd known it moves as much as it did.
Wouldn't we all?
No kidding. So our scope was specific to the archives. And while we did interconnect with records management and other components, it was tangential discussions that we had along the way. We didn't go into the records management function and go into detail in it, though they are involved in our reports. There is more work to be done by Sue and her team on that side of it. We did spend a lot of time really focused just on the archives for the purposes of this engagement. A couple of slides down. So now Reese is going to talk about what is an archive, and Ellen's going to pipe in along the way as well.
Sure. Thanks, Chris, and thanks for having us today. As Chris mentioned, I'm the project manager for this project and the other facility assessment review following. And actually, I'm just going to turn over to Ellen, because who better to hear about an archives than a professional archivist as opposed to me. So she's going to run through slide 6 and provide us some context to kind of what an overall archives entails and its functions. And I'll follow up after that with some details on the City of Wetaskiwin's archives. Ellen, are you able to connect?
Yeah, sure, I'm here.
Thank you.
So the slide outlines how the archives function and its role, the kind of records it collects, and what a municipal archive in particular would do. And I wanted to add on that, since many members of the public aren't familiar with archives and what they do, I thought it'd be useful to have additional information. Essentially, the primary role of an archive is to serve as the collective memory of the city. It safeguards recorded information that documents your operations and achievements of municipal government. It also does the same for the broader community, and that could include key personalities, events, businesses, organizations, and institutions within the city that have shaped the history and success of Wetaskiwin since it began. These two categories of records, along with the county records that the archives has, complement each other and provide a full and complete picture of how the city was founded, evolved, and took on its current form. Also, the records would reveal Indigenous groups and nations that lived in the area before settlement and afterwards. By preserving these records, the archives ensures that future generations can appreciate the contributions made by Wetaskiwin residents past and present. And in essence, it sort of serves as the city's legacy by protecting it. It also has dual function of serving the public and conducting outreach work with local museums, the Genealogical Society, and other heritage organizations to help educate and engage the public in Wetaskiwin and other locales about the rich history of the city and its citizens. In addition to keeping these stories alive, this vital work gives residents a sense of identity and civic pride. Finally, as a record-keeping agency, the Archives works with records management to safeguard the city's information assets, and that can include all media, like textual records, photos, audiovisual maps, and architectural drawings, along with digital materials. They make them readily available to city staff, and they protect these unique and irreplaceable records from degeneration, but also from threats like fire, insects, mold, and floods. This helps the city remain compliant. It also secures the information that the city needs to make major decisions and also learn from past decisions, both good and bad, and ultimately to locate evidence that it requires when brokering major deals or protecting the city if any potential court cases arise. So that's my overview. I'll give it back to Reese.
Thank you, Ellen.
No problem.
Get that on to the next one. Thank you. This slide helps us to kind of contextualize how the municipal information management lifecycle fits in with the archives. So the cycle you see in front of you is to kind of ensure the protection of municipal information, and it follows the basic cycle of documents and records are created and collected by city employees, which flows into records management where they're organized and further organized if they're deemed not transitory to be active records, which are used quite regularly and accessed and would be handy for councillors and administration to utilize. The less utilized records become semi-active and may be stored perhaps offsite, like the ones that are currently in the civic building. And those records are eventually deemed dormant, which become archival or non-archival, depending on the value. Typically, about 20% of those dormant records become archival, and the rest are likely disposed. But that's kind of visualize how the archives plays into that whole cycle. And on the right, this shows the interactions and interdependencies of various city functions, the role of records management, information technology, leadership and administration. It all kind of ties together, and the archives play an important role in that. Slow down. So I'm going to talk a bit about the City of Wetaskiwin's archives. That was kind of some context to archives in general, but as you can see here, the life cycle of the archive started back in 1978 when the mandate was given to collect and care for the documentary heritage of the city, Wetaskiwin and surrounding areas. Carolyn Hill was hired as the first archivist full-time in 1985, and since then we can see it's gone through a number of changes and different staffing and iterations of who's been involved and where the reporting structure has lied, and coming up to the last few years, as Paul talked about, kind of the background of what's happened with the resignation of the archivist in 2020 and the MOU that was provided to with the library and back to the city, and with the eventual resignation in November 2020, the archivist, and leading us to the review we have here, and that leads us to the current state. Thank you. This slide here talks a bit about some of the function that the archives in Wetaskiwin and who they serve. So the important thing to take away here is that the archives serve both the city and the community. The items on the right, the list, those are largely related to the storage and reference of documents and the transfer of records from management to the archives. But just want to make sure we're clear that the beyond just a records management piece and archival records, the access to the community and the various outreach programs that the archives has with the community members and different partnerships with museums and local organizations, access for students and field trips, and just want to make sure we capture the full function of the archives here. So a busy slide, a lot of information. I just wanted to demonstrate the various holdings we have. So the records right now are currently split about 50% between the city's records, and the other 50% are between private records and county records. And private records, just so we're clear on that, they don't belong to private citizens. They are the possession of the archives. They are the they are the possession of the archives here. City records include such documents as council meetings, bylaws, old engineering studies and contracts, and used for municipal practices. The county records include school registers, tax rolls and correspondence, and can provide some information about the greater community. And the private records, which are 41% of the collection, belong to various businesses, organizations, schools, and they, as Ellen said, they supplement the municipal records that we have. They tell the full history, the full story of Wetaskiwin and the surrounding area. I just want to point out one example of something you might find interesting and would see in the archives. So About 10 years ago, the city was involved in a land sale for a piece of land worth about $1 million. And the sale was contingent upon relieving some environmental concerns. And the archivist was able to find the document that proved that there were no gas tanks on the site, as it was a former gas station. Just example to show, without those archives, the city probably would not have been able to complete that sale. So that's something the archivist found in her interviews. Through the assessment, a number of challenges were identified. One being a no dedicated HVAC system, which makes it difficult to control the temperature and humidity in the vault and preservation of those records. Lack of a fire suppression system, should that take place in the current location of the archives. Limited storage capacity. And just to be clear on this, current holdings are fine in the archives. It's just with expansion, and of course archives, you always gain more records, you don't lose them. So just a consideration for the future. One of the pressures definitely felt and that we understood through our assessment is understaffing. You can see on the right that the number of requests for information have increased drastically over the past number of years. I shouldn't say drastically, significantly. And part of that is the challenge is having less staff to accommodate those requests. About half of those come from the city, the other half come from citizens, and they're not just coming from Wetaskiwin. Some of these come from out of province, even out of country, as the city's archives are quite well known, as Ellen can attest to. Some of those requests also have been, it's kind of a product of your own success. The more you promote yourselves and have an online social media presence, which has been quite successful, the more requests come in. I'll touch quickly on a financial state of the archives. The budget was fairly stable. The number one cost driver being staffing costs. The downturn you can see was when the archives was closing. The budget was perhaps reallocated. Important to note here, municipal archives in Canada, the business model is not to be a revenue generator. They don't bring in a ton of revenue, and they're not designed that way. So it's important to keep that in mind. It's not that it's failing to generate revenue, it's just not the design of an archives. We do mention grants in the bottom corner. Just to remind, there are grants out there. They can be challenging to receive, as they do require often matching dollars, which is not always available to match. As part of the archival review, Ellen conducted some benchmarking exercises where she interviewed and did some research on various archives across Canada, different sizes, different populations, and representation across the country. Just to highlight here, Wetaskiwin's archives do excel in a number of areas. Their acquisitioning, accessioning, and appraisal practices were quite well compared to the other municipalities. Good physical and intellectual control, meaning that those records are well organized and there's access to those records by archival standards. Proper preservation methods, and good full reference services to not only the city staff, but the public and local heritage organizations. Some areas considered for improvement in comparison to others, general policies and procedures, disaster response plan, records management system, and some increased collaboration between different city functions would be a benefit. One note here on the budget, there's quite a range, 80,000, 8,800. The Squamish, BC, if that's pronunciation, I apologize. That's operational only. It doesn't include any salaries or benefits. And Simcoe, Ontario, you can see is a significantly larger population and archives. So it's tough to compare straight across. This slide here, this is our SWOT analysis. Strengths and weaknesses are internal, and opportunities and threats are external. Stakeholder engagement was a significant part of this project, and something that Paul and MNP worked very hard on to develop a comprehensive strategy to ensure we heard from stakeholders across the community. It's included local business, education professionals, museums, historical organizations. We had a community-wide survey available throughout the summer. And in order to kind of gather all that information and summarize it, this is kind of a good way for us to visualize and represent it. So just some key highlights here. Internally, strength, wide range of well-preserved collection, which is well used by the community. These records and holdings have been being collected for the last well over 40 years, and it's a well-known community, or sorry, a collection. Just finding my notes here, apologize. Yeah, well utilized by the community and the surrounding area. City staff, genealogists, academics, local historians, journalists, real estate agents, film crews, Indigenous researchers and museums. So it is, it's widely used. Some of the weaknesses we identified through stakeholder engagement, perhaps a lacking strategic vision, which I think part of this project is to help arrive at that in some time. Lack of staffing can be a challenge and has been. The previous archivist did a tremendous job from what we've seen based on the amount of reference requests and the workload that she had. There could be some increased collaboration between city's functions, as I mentioned previously. Some of the opportunities, there is a strong interest in the archives from community members. So there's some strong advocates out there that are helping to raise awareness and profile of the archives, and opportunity there to help them with, they can help identify projects and outreach partnerships. There is a new records manager and new grant coordinator with the city. So there's opportunity there to find some efficiencies and perhaps find some grant funding. Some of the threats identified, it's kind of being a victim of your own success. Growing community demands is places more pressure on the archives. So unless there are additional resources or staffing allocated, it can be challenging to meet those community demands. Shifts in municipal priorities, it's an ongoing threat throughout any administration or council, and the lack of grant funding can be challenging as well. Like I said, it's a lot of those are matching requirements, so it's a challenge to just pick those up.
All right. Just one second, Reese, before we move on, the 204 community members, how were they selected?
It was posted on the city's website and it was promoted to the city's communications. And so it was open for 4 to 5 weeks over the summer.
We didn't select them, they were self-selected.
Yeah.
Councillor Billingsley, would you prefer questions as we go along or at the end?
Up to you, sir.
Okay.
I'll echo on the mayor's question. I'd like to know how this, the 204 were selected. Because it says it's well used, one of the strengths was well used by the community. What's the bar to say that it's well used? Is it because we looked up
365.
365, is that well used? Like, is 212 well used?
Yeah, I think, well, maybe I'd let Ellen add to this if in a moment, but when we did our stakeholder consultation, right, sorry, thank you. When we did our stakeholder consultation, the discussion was about, we didn't have a number of events that it was met the well used, but when it was in discussions with community groups, citizens, businesses, museums, those groups that had contact and interaction with them, and the degree to which it was missed in the community was part of it when it was closed down. And so that is a subjective comment from us. Absolutely. It's not a bar that 100 in events was not well used and 102 is well used. It is a subjective analysis of what we heard from the folks that provided input in all of the focus groups that we did, as well as the stakeholder consultation. Anything to add on that, Reese, before you hand it back to Ellen?
No, that absolutely makes sense. It's said, well use is a subjective term based on the input we received from our-
And sorry, and just to follow up, of those 204, were any of those people random people in the community, or is it people who would be interested in archives? In other words, if you're going to ask the people who use archives, of course, they're going to be very passionate about it. But if you were to sample 50 people in the community, was that type of data collection done?
It was not we did not do any random sampling in the community. No, that wasn't part of the scope of what we were asked to do. But we did include a number of different groups in the stakeholder consultation part in terms of focus groups with a number of different areas as well. But there wasn't a random sampling of the community, no.
Thank you.
Ellen, anything to add on that?
No, nothing from me since I wasn't really all that involved in the survey.
Okay.
I can provide some information on the survey result.
Please, Jing Jing.
Yeah, so as Chris was explaining, we put the survey on the city website, and then just depending on, could be whoever is interested who would participate in this survey. But in general, out of all the 204 individuals, 75% of them are familiar or aware of the archives. Another 25% are not even aware of the archives. And then when it comes to utilization, 62% of the respondents visit the archives at least once a year. So that's another data that helped us to draw the conclusion.
Councilor Bisley, you look like you're about to ask another
Yeah,
question.
I actually am. Does that math make sense? That 65% of those 204, when only 365 people, that means that pretty much everybody who did the survey came to visit the archives in the past year.
It was 75% said they were aware of it. 62% had used it that were aware of it.
Okay.
Is that right, Jing Jing? I think I got those two right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So the next step in our process was to come up with some models, and this was done in collaboration with our focus group with city manager. And at first we had 4, then we went down to 3 when we realized a couple of them were actually kind of the same option, just written differently. So that was a valuable conversation with city management. And to be clear, our Dr. Steinberg did provide a full report with a number of recommendations, which is the appendix to the report. So her expertise and her recommendations are held in a number of the recommendations within that report that is attached to it. What we were asked to do is come up with some options that would be different ways of approaching it. And Ellen can talk to these as we go along, but we'll try and walk through each of these recommendations and what they are and how we got to them. A couple of key points from where Reese and Ellen talked about earlier. One is remembering as we went through this, we kept in mind that the archives are the collective history of the city, and that history is made up of multiple points of origin. There are different points of history or pieces of history that come from different points of origin, that it is used by the administration for the good of the city to answer questions, like the example that was given earlier. It's also used by citizens, businesses, schools, community orgs, as well as external groups, historians, genealogical societies, and the like that also do this. So as we looked at it, those are the types of context that we had as we built these options. When we built the options, there were 5 or 6 strategic criteria that we used to assess the options. Strategic alignment, and on the next slides, you'll see a consulting tool we like to call Harvey balls. Those Harvey balls are the circles with they're either half, 3/4, or empty, and those are subjective. There are look at how well they aligned, and then we also work through them with administration to see what their view of it as well. So you see both of those in the report. Strategic alignment was meant to ensure that the priorities and the vision of the city was represented in the future of the archives. And the degree to which it did so, the higher degree we thought that particular item met that requirement, the more the Harvey ball was filled in. The next one was legislative compliance. When evaluating these options, the archives, it is important to stay within the legislative requirements set by both the federal and provincial governments, as well as municipal bylaws. When it comes to municipal needs fulfillment, this was about gaining, does the municipality gain from the option with its internal operations? Is it able to continue to deliver on its mandate within the city? Community fulfillment was very much about the whether it's meeting the needs and services that were identified by stakeholders and by our research and by our expert providing context to that as well. Financial cost is pretty straightforward. It's the costs and benefits and the implications of staying within budget and the degree to which it could do that is how the Harvey balls were filled out. Then finally, the organizational changes was all about governance, organizational change in order to successfully implement a change in the option. So what was the impact in the organization and the degree to which we thought that would impact the organization positively or negatively. So those are the components that each of these three options were viewed at and how we looked at it. And that's how we assessed the different components. And I'll walk through each one. And this slide right now you see in front of you talks about some of the key differences between them. The middle one talks about the types of records. Enhanced status quo and the fully integrated information management model are the full suite of records that they have today, both city, private, county. The municipally focused model is one that focuses on the city records, and those created and produced and owned by or developed by the city. There are risks to that, and there is further work to be done on the cost of moving those county or private archives elements to other places, and we'll talk about those when we get to that option. So I was just going to use this as a touch screen. That clearly was not going to work, though I bet it would as it looked at me over there. So we're going to walk through each of those models. The first one is the enhanced status quo model. It's enhanced for a couple of reasons. One, it's open. So the actual status quo is it's closed. So this one in terms of enhanced, we talked about it being moving back to opening it and having a professional archivist in place. In this one, it would be a standalone department. It would be improved fire suppression and addressing some of those challenges that were identified in terms of the HVACs, fire suppression, some of the space issues. And while that estimated operating cost of 100 and 150,000 would include the cost of an archivist and potentially additional resources, it does not include the capital required to do the upgrades to the suppression system, et cetera. One of the things about this model is that it does address some of the identified needs of the community as well as the municipality. There's increased access and outreach for the public in collaboration with partners. It's probably the most efficient responses to municipal requests. Oh, I'm reading the wrong one. So and so we do think this is also the least change for the organization. As I said, that it does meet the municipal and community needs. There is access for members, although the public is definitely looking for more access, not less. And as you saw from one of those charts, the interest in archives has been growing and escalating across the province. And in fact, it's a trend across communities, is having an increased use of and access to the historical information. In part, that is a COVID effect. People are at home and they're really interested in history and their city and their places. And And I really am not saying this facetiously, but people have time on their hands at home to do some of these things. And so there has been an active increase across communities, and most of us don't think that's going to end just because we return to some kind of normal at some point in the future. There probably would be a need for some increase in resources, and that's why we've talked about that professional archivist in here as well. Structurally, we see it continuing as is, and we'll talk about the integrated management model in a minute and why it's a little bit better if we did that. That's the key on this enhanced status quo. Open it up, return to a professional archivist, and address some of the additional services that would be needed or wanted by community members. Maybe it'd be a good idea, Mayor, just to stop for a second if there are any questions with regards to that model before we move on. And we can have more at the end for sure. Yes, Councillor Bloom.
Yeah, just for clarification. So the only data collection of information about the use of the existing archives was through the city's website?
No.
Through that online survey?
No.
There was other data collected?
Yes, there
Thank
was.
you.
It was, maybe Reese, you want to go into that?
Yeah, we did a comprehensive stakeholder engagement strategy. We identified stakeholders based on input from Paul and from the city, which included different museum and historical organizations and other stakeholders in the community. And the survey was directed to some of those other groups as well who weren't able to participate in those interviews or discussion groups. To the survey.
And we also contacted some of the First Nations communities that are close by and did get input from them through the survey as well. They were asked to be involved, and that was the way that they chose to be involved in this activity.
Another data we have is, I think it's in one of the previous slide, is the number of requests. If we look at the trend from 2012 to 2019, the number of requests increased from 81 per year to 365 in 2019 before its closure. So that's if the archives is open every day, so that's one request a day.
Thanks, Jing Jing.
Thanks.
Any other questions before we move on? Yes, Dr.
Through the chair to the presenting, when you talk about that increase, can you clarify, is that community and city requests in 2019 that went up?
I believe so, yeah.
It is.
Yes, it
Right,
is.
so it's even administration acknowledging or understanding or having to use it as much as the community did.
Yeah, the requests were about 50-50 from our understanding. Thank you.
All right, we'll keep on moving. Our second option is the fully integrated model. This option is going to require the most organizational change and the most additional work to understand it. The reason is, as I mentioned earlier, the scope of our original investigation. We were focused on the archives. Records management is a separate part of the city, reporting to a separate leader. And but in working with Ellen and working with the managers and looking at other organizations, one of the challenges faced by the organization today is that integration of the records management and archives and information management. So this would be a much more robust solution. It would address most of the needs of the community, the municipality and legislative needs. In particular, part of that is through increased resources. The chronic understaffing of the facility is something that's been documented for a while, and that need for a professional archivist and then the focus on the community needs is one of the reasons that would need to be an assessment of 1 to 3 additional archive assistants to take some of that pressure off the professional archivist to do the job of archiving. I'm not sure that that's our word, Ellen, but she can yell at me later for using the wrong word. I don't know if archiving is even a real word, to be honest. So that's where we're at with that one. This one definitely would be, we would see it being open more, being available more, and being definitely more community focused as part of the way they do it. Any questions on this particular option? Nope. Thank you.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So when you have your score on the right-hand side, MNP evaluation, city rep evaluation. So city rep evaluation represents who?
That was, do you want to take that? Yes, ma'am. Okay. It was Sue, Paul, and Alan.
Okay, thank you.
What we did was we conducted a workshop with them and went through each of these. We got them to vote essentially on the different, their assessment of the each of the criteria and the option as described. And I'm not surprised that they're different, quite frankly, because their priorities are different than ours coming from the outside.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sue.
For the chair, I was just going to point out that the reason they are different is we look at that from a different lens. So they were looking at it strictly from a functional outside view, where, you know, the three of us had I think a greater pulse on what council strategic plans and, you know, the other priorities in the organization. So that's why they're different.
And which is why it was really important to get their perspective as well.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to Reese. Some of the municipalities you listed, they used volunteers. So instead of having 3 FTEs, it would be possible to have some volunteers come in, which might keep the operating costs down as well, right?
It would, but on that point, in our stakeholder engagement, we heard there is a challenge in recruiting volunteers, and it's just the I guess urgency from those volunteers to help out is just not there, and it's been an ongoing challenge, and they haven't been able to recruit as many as they would like. But absolutely, that would certainly be a recommendation to look into. If it was possible to have more volunteers, it would certainly cut down and increase your resources.
Right. Thank you.
Carry on.
Sorry?
Carry on.
Oh, carry on. Sorry. I had no idea what those words were until you said them again. All right. So the last one is a municipally focused model. And this one is really about saying we're going to simply do municipal business. It's going to function to support the core legislative requirements and the needs of the city. And so there are rules around FOIP and availability and access to archives. And of course, the city would continue to do that. It'd be the reason that we don't have it at the full legislative compliance is just capacity and things like meeting the number of days and to respond to requests and those sorts of things. So this was a bit of a subject of will you be able to get there from here? The second part of this one is probably the most important is the redistribution of the holdings and taking those private and county archives and sending them back to where someone else would take care of them. The challenge in that is that you may not find someone who's willing to take care of them. And you cannot simply put them in a dumpster and burn them. There are rules around, you can't just digitize them and take that. Then Ellen could speak to if necessary. The requirement to keep the original, even if you digitize something, you need to keep the original. So there are some challenges to that. You would probably have to go through some work to do that transfer of those records and find someone willing to take them on, which could be a significant endeavor, but is possible. and is something that the administration could do. There is likely that there'll be backlash from public stakeholders and who utilize the archives for research, work, personal reasons, and for organizations and families that may have donated their private archives. Something to keep in mind, the private archives it's not a storage place where people just go and put their old stuff. It is archival materials. And one of the things in the report that is one of the things that this archives has done very well is the review of the archival material and then classifying it and making sure that what is in fact in your archives is good archival material. It should be there. It's not just stuff that was dropped off in a bin. So those are important records that talk about the history of the city. But this is a choice that you can make, and you have responsibility around budget and the rest of the priorities of the city. And you could move in this space. It is a potential option that you could definitely move towards should it be the will of council. The other part in here about the municipal needs not potentially not being met are our example back to looking in the archive to find something out back in history, that idea of the land sale. And would you have known that without the archives? Our understanding is the material that proved it wasn't a municipal record. It was part of a private record that was found in the archives. So that's some of what's in there. And this idea of the lost shared history of the city of Wetaskiwin, and with that transfer of parent and county records. So that's our third model. Any questions before I sum it up? Yes, sir.
Councillor Nielsen.
Thank you. You very purposely gone through and indicated costs and said capital costs not included, but you identified deficiencies in HVAC systems and that kind of thing. Did you put any kind of dollar value on those deficiencies that would be tacked on to the operational costs?
No, we didn't. It was beyond our scope to go to that level of detail in terms of understanding and researching the capital cost. In addition, the next group that's coming in, we're in the midst of the facility review. And so we were trying to separate some of our scope between the two. And the direction of Paul was to focus on to leave the capital cost piece out for now, because we knew once you've made a decision on where you're going, there's more work to be done, which would be part of that would be how much capital and how much detail in the operating that.
Yeah, my only concern would be making a decision about where we're going without understanding what the capital implications might be could be pretty disastrous in the end.
That's fair.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
All right. So just to sum up, we had our three different options here. Option one, which as you remember was the enhanced on status quo, a standalone organization, one archivist using the current space and staffing of a single archivist, opening the archives back up and having some public access to it, and a cost that would be above, but not too far above where the cost was before. Second option around an integrated municipal model. The governance would be through the information management department in a consolidated approach, an increase in staffing of 2 to 4 people. Looking at the space, you probably need an increase of space between 30 and 50% over the long term. And the costs are increased because of the additional staffing costs. And then finally, the standalone or under records management for the third option, the municipal one, still needing one archivist or potentially an equivalent to an archivist, and using the current space, and cost could be somewhat less in this one if you're not open as much as you would have otherwise. And then below you've got sort of our estimation and then some of the comments from administration. And with that, I would thank you for their time today and take on any questions. Councillor Blatz.
Through the chair, When we go back up to the slide, I think it's slide 14, that it's talking about comparing to other municipal archives. We didn't really have much to compare to for other Alberta municipalities other than Red Deer. But the one that is closest to our population is in BC, and I'm not going to try to pronounce it, but it says that its budget is $8,000 a year plus grants. And I was just wondering why, with their population being larger than ours, why is their budget significantly less than ours?
Yeah, Esquimalt, and you can answer it a little bit more, but the key to it is it doesn't, the way they accounted for their financial information and provided to us did not include the salary costs. So there were salary costs that they didn't provide to us, if that's right, Reese.
Yeah, it's correct. The finances are tough to compare. We can only go by what they're willing to share with us. That's why there's NA under OPE and Red Deer. And yes, the 8,000 is strictly operational, not including staffing.
So I think the staffing would be similar. The cost would have been similar because it was one FTE. And I believe it was an archivist in that place. So the cost would likely be similar, but we just didn't have it.
I think that I'm just kind of struggling with the numbers a little bit, just because of the fact that we don't really have anything to compare it to, especially for municipality our size. So I think that that's where I'm really struggling with this, is trying to figure out what an acceptable budget looks like for archives when we have nothing to compare it to. The only thing that does have a number on it is the one in Ontario, and that one, of course, is astronomically larger than ours. And so I think that I'm just having a really hard time going through all of these different options when I don't know what everybody else is paying for it.
That is fair, and it was one of the challenges, was trying to find comparable organizations, and B, getting the information so that we could provide it. Ellen, would you be able to add anything to sort of help Councillor Blatz with that understanding of what an archives looks like?
Sure. So it was difficult finding archives that were similar size. There are a number, but these ones, the two smaller ones, seem to be very good comparables. One had a full-time archivist and the other had an archivist records manager. They both had masters in archival studies, but and both did some records management. One was sort of splitting her time in between both and reporting to two different managers. They really couldn't share their budget with me. So all I got from Esquimalt was the 8,000 on top of salary. So that would cover supplies and storage and whatever else they required. So that was really a challenge, trying to get a hold of the financials for these different institutions.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Nielsen.
Through the chair to MNP, it could be anybody, I guess. The fact that we have so few comparables, can I draw the conclusion there are not many communities running archives or operationalizing archives?
I think there are a number of different models and that are capturing information in different ways. But I'm going to pass it back to Ellen to comment more on her experience with different communities.
Yeah, there's many municipal archives across the country, and they really range in size from some that are smaller than Wetaskiwin's to major cities like City of Toronto archives. And it's really, sometimes it's comparing apples and oranges because the community sizes are so different and their needs are different, but there's really a huge number all over Canada. The challenge was finding those that are, in the right population size and have similar responsibilities and roles within the community.
But if I were to look at the province of Alberta and neighboring communities, Camrose, Stettler, Lacombe, Beaumont, Stony Plain, Sherwood Park, would they or would they not be operationalizing an archives? Would you know?
Did we check into those communities, Ellen?
A lot of these communities didn't have their own archives. We found in Leduc, they had a robust records management program with 4 records managers, and they were talking about hiring an archivist or heritage expert. But a lot of them really didn't set up an archive. So, you know, once it really takes resources and a lot of support from the community to get an archives off the ground and, you know, have the budget and support to keep it running.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess this is to the CAO. As we're supposed to be making a decision tonight, I'd like to know what the city has been doing for the past year to look after any requests that have come from the county, from private, from the city. How have we managed archives for the last 12 months with archives being closed?
Through the mayor to Councillor Elliott, those requests have been coming through my desk right across Canada. We've received, sorry, I didn't come into the meeting this evening with a number that I've received, but it is significant. I generally, when I get phone calls, I will, since the archives has been closed, I've been deferring them to either the Genealogical Society here in Wetaskiwin or the Heritage and District Museum here in town. And they haven't phoned back, so I imagine that they've either received the information or were forwarded to another professional, either in the community or externally, to get that same amount of information. In addition to the requests for information that we've received, we have received a number of items from across Canada that would, when the archives opens up, we would then forward it. They're sitting in my office essentially for safekeeping until that time.
Thank you very much.
Through the chair to Councillor Elliott, I think the other part of that question too is you'll be expected to make a decision tonight, and what we're actually looking for is, of these 3 options, what do you want us to explore further? So we're not saying, you know, make a permanent decision on the archives right now. It could get costly if we explore all 3. So 1 or 2 at most is what we're looking for, or even just 1 that you want us to explore, and then we can dig deeper into those costs that weren't really identified here today.
Yeah, excuse me, I understand that. I just was kind of wondering. So you've had a number of requests, Paul.
Through the mayor to Councillor Elliott, we have received a number of requests either via phone call or email. We've also received a lot of commentary on the Facebook. The social media presence of the Wetaskiwin Archives is significant.
Thank you.
Councillor Billington.
Through the chair to Paul, you said that you've been receiving many phone calls from across Canada. How many are coming from within our community, percentage-wise, best guess?
I would say 30% within the community, everything else from across Canada, outside of the province.
Thank you.
Councillor Aberley.
Through the chair to council, I've been keeping quiet on this a little bit because you all know that heritage is my background professionally. Our archives is special, and it is hard to make that idea about funding, right? Bringing that up is we don't have many things in Alberta to be able to compare it to, because Wetaskiwin was forward thinking in the late 70s, early 80s in the way it approached heritage. So those comparisons are going to be really hard. It's when I think to the identity and the civic pride and the things that we put through in the community vision, I personally, and that's, you know, really am championing that we move forward with these things, but understanding, that's why I asked the 50% question, is that it's not just our community. And right now, the members in our community who use it, I'm not contacting Paul this year to use the archives because I know it's closed, right? So what is that building up on it as we start to look in it from those senses is its specialness. It puts Wetaskiwin above. We're trying to work on our image. We're trying to work on ways that we can move forward as being a progressive city where we want to bring people in, looking at it, and heritage is trending up. So thank you very much for presenting this, and to not look at it quite as that business model, but more what the archives is doing for our community as a whole.
Councillor Nielsen.
Thank you. So much of what you said, Karen, resonates with me. I really do think that we have a unique community, from the Indigenous component to the farming agricultural component. And it is, and we attempted to embrace that in our visioning and our new branding and all the rest of it. The difficulty I'm wrestling with here is that if we really want to hold up archives as being something to build a reputation around, or set us a step above, then I'm not convinced that you do it the way we've been doing it, because I don't think that put us a step above. We sort of just managed. And even in our management, we heard from our archivist that she couldn't get to everything and that she couldn't get volunteers to help. So to maintain the status quo in terms of where we were before, we will be simply sort of managing. And I don't think it will accomplish what it is you think we should accomplish, and on many levels what I think we should accomplish. But at the end of the day, if we really want to make our archives something special and add it to our resume and market our community as being something special, then I think as a council, we've got to be prepared to step up and put some significant dollars into it. And I think that has been the choking point all along over these years, is when we came to archives, we said, well, look, they haven't really done a whole lot, so we don't want to put a bunch of money into it, but we're not happy with the way it's operating. So to me, it's really either you jump in and try and make something magical out of it, or maybe you get out of the business. And that's where I'm struggling, because jumping in, and that's why I made the comment about the capital costs. When you start throwing capital costs in and they're talking about finding more storage space and all the rest of it, that means turning our civic building into an archive building almost in its entirety, or a good portion of it. We certainly have the space there, but you're talking about some major capital dollars to make this work. And do we as a council, and does our community have the appetite to really go there? And I think that's probably what we're being asked tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to clarify, really look into that difference between the historical archives and the process that it's doing for administration as well. Right. So if we're jumping in, if we're going to jump in, that it's not just to not just think historical archives. And that's where I like that idea of bringing it in, working how it used to work when it was successful and this was happening. And it was as we started to separate, in my understanding of the history of the archives, it was as we started to separate it away from records management over the last decade, was when there started to be more of this not having enough time, not working strength numbers, and bringing it back. And just, so I want to almost go back in history with that 10 years into when it was successful, when the archivist was supported by other city staff members, and looking at not just the historical part of it, but also the city records.
So you want to make a motion and then we can debate it instead of debating in general? Councillor Everly.
I move that City Council direct administration to proceed with an analysis designed to explore the impacts to both the city and community by pursuing option 2, as per the report dated November 22nd, 2021, and to report back to council by end of Q2 2022.
Moved by Councillor Everly. Any discussion? Councillor Billingsley.
I'm not prepared to spend that kind of money. Not saying that the archives isn't important. It's important to many people, and there's many good things that are inside of that archive. With so many different priorities that the city has, I'm not sure that this is near the top. And maybe not near the top, but we're talking anywhere from $200,000 to $400,000 plus capital. And I think that's what Councilor Nielsen kind of said, is that either you jump in with both feet, as your motion said, or we step back and scale it back. And because of the amount of infrastructure that we need to take a look at within the city, this is, in my opinion, not a priority to me.
Councillor Everly.
Thank you through the mayor to MNP. Can you clarify whether that increase in option 2, is that going to already include a staff member that is currently on, right? So if we're talking about amalgamating portions, or is that in addition to what's already budgeted in our budgeting?
Reese, you can confirm this for me. The 200 to 400,000 is inclusive of opening and adding back the archivist that isn't on right now. So you have very little in expenses right now, but it's closed. And it would be, we believe that the resources as identified in the blue on this slide are incremental new. That being said, the records management leadership hasn't weighed in on what the real impacts would be when you do integrate it, because they were out of scope, as we said earlier. And it's why there's such a wide range. It would be about looking at what really is the volume of effort required, as well as what synergies you can get between records management when you went to implement this one, if you implemented it. A $200,000 to $400,000 range is a massive range, and we understand that going into it. But it's because of that need to talk and have the records management leadership weigh in on this as to the direction between the two. But it's going from 0 today is where our starting point is. So there is very little cost in there right now. And the 200 would include the archivist that was there previously, an archivist that was not, an archivist was there previously, plus additional resources.
Yeah, may I, because maybe I'm misunderstanding. We have somebody who works in records management now, right? So with that, are we looking in addition to somebody who's already employed in these numbers?
These do not include records management staffing right now. No.
Okay. Thank you.
Paul?
Through the mayor to Councillor Aberley or council. I think what we're asking for this evening is just to choose the option that you prefer. There is significant amount of analysis required to do still. So the looking at the existing resources we have in play, both on the archive side and records management side, would be part of the analysis if council were to approve this motion.
Councillor Lonsdale.
Thank you, sir. I was just going to say I concur with Councillor Billingsley. With all of the efficiencies we're trying to find to save money here and there, and infrastructure and other needs in the city, I would love to have a fully functional archives. But at this point in time, I'm not ready to jump from the $80,000 range into the $200,000 to $400,000 range of taxpayers' money.
Counselor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to the Director of Community Services. I get that correct tonight?
Through the mayor to Councillor Elliott, you may call me whatever you like.
Okay. Just
Be
to-
careful. Be careful.
No, I won't say it. Okay. Just to clarify, under staffing, senior management may include yourself as the senior management overseeing archives. Is that possible? I know you're going to do the analysis, but I'm asking hypothetical.
Through the mayor to Councillor Elliott, the way that we've been organizing our structuring our organization, I would think that that would be somebody in additional to the director or general manager. It wouldn't be the general manager overseeing that portfolio. One senior manager, and perhaps MMP can speak to the job description, but I would think that that would be somebody that is exclusively overseeing the business unit, exclusively overseeing the budget and the spend, exclusively overseeing the business planning and the work that needs to happen to move that function forward and to have it evolve with the community over time. And so our portfolios as general managers, it's very broad, and it's very much between council and the city manager and our direct reports. In this case, the senior manager would report directly, I would think would report directly to the general manager.
And just, if I may, just to finish, this doesn't have to be implemented all in one fell swoop. This could be over 3 years or 4 years, so we don't have to spend $200,000 in 2022. We could spend $80,000 in 2022, and then as the archives and records management and everything starts to do more, then we could see how much staff we would need.
Through the mayor to Councillor Elliott, absolutely. I would think that the analysis that comes back by the end of Q2 2022 would include some sort of a roadmap as far as obviously you're going to go into the staffing impacts, the financial impacts, but then also what's the roadmap over the next year, 2 years.
And just go ahead. I'm sorry.
Just to add to what Mr. Edgington talked about, and I'll actually qualify my comment earlier, Councillor Everly. This is meant to be incremental, but Reese did point out to me that there is potential that senior manager could be shared with the records management, but we didn't do enough work to know if there was a need for another senior manager or there was someone with capacity inside the organization on the records management side that could take that up. So it's possible that would be a shared senior manager, but we didn't think it was going to land on Paul's lap to do that role. And that this would likely, because it is in a fully integrated information management model, we would see it more moving into that area of the organization and out of community services, most likely.
Okay, thank you. And just to conclude, Mr. Mayor, the city renovated the water tower. The city renovated City Hall because they felt that the history of Wetaskiwin was important. And there were a lot of millions of dollars spent that way. And I feel that the archives helps to preserve that and will have history, help us preserve our history, which is very important to our community. One of the first cities in the province of Alberta. Thank you.
Councilor Nielsen.
Thank you. Through the chair to MNP. We do currently have a number of items that I would call, for lack of better words, fragile. And you've spoken about the various capital needs to address that fragileness of the fragility of some of the collection. And again, I know this was not your mandate, but how concerned do we need to be as a council that as every day ticks away here, we are potentially losing historical items and data?
So I'll start, and then Ellen, I think it'd be good for you to pipe in on this one. As I understand it, the risks around fire suppression and flood and those sorts of things are low probability items around, but if they happened, they would be devastating. The archives themselves, I think are in pretty good shape. And Ellen, you can validate this, and Jing Jing, you did the tour here, but they're in good shape, and I don't believe are deteriorating. These are more longer term things, but Ellen, and maybe you could start, and then Jing Jing out.
Yeah, sure. That's a good question. When we did the site visit, we found that the records were in good shape and that the facility manager was doing a good job maintaining the temperature and humidity levels. But you did raise the issue of what happens while the archives is closed to all these materials out there. And while some people are reaching out to Paul, you find that sometimes people throw things out, like if they're downsizing their house and there's all this material, historic material about the community or about the family or a business, sometimes they just throw it out. And so you might be missing out on potential donations while the archives is closed. So I mean, there is a cost to remaining closed, and it might be good to notify the community to just kind of sit tight if there's a desire to reopen and acquire some of those materials once the archives is up and running again, if you decide to pursue that route.
But Ellen, the current materials in the archives are in good condition, and there's no imminent worry that they will deteriorate?
No, for now they're fine, because we found that they are being maintained properly, and they should be fine.
Thank you. And may I ask a second one? Thank you. Through the chair to Sue, I guess. A number of years ago, concern was raised with regard to all of our city records and a need to address a records management system. And my observation, although it may not be accurate, is that we've sort of limped along in that process. So my question to you, I guess, really is, from your perspective as the CAO, where are we at on managing our own records, setting aside the archives?
Through the chair to Councillor Nielsen, we are desperate. So I can't remember how long Juanita's been with us now. So we've combined the records management and FOIP functions. And when Juanita first came on, her main focus was to make sure that we were compliant with FOIP legislation. And then she's moving into the records management side of it to really assess and figure out what we need as an organization and how to move us forward. So until that assessment piece is done, Alan will bring forward recommendations potentially through budget this year and or next year on where we can grow this function, but we're in a position of risk when it comes to our records management internally.
And I think on so many levels, I stand with Councillor Billingsley in terms of where do we want to spend our money, and Councillor Lonsdale, but at the same time, we have the need for archival records in the city level too, which aren't necessarily being addressed fully. So I'm going to support the motion, because I think we need to examine both sides of this conversation and see what the real cost will be of doing this, ensuring that we have both sides of the coin covered and what kind of the dollars will be. And in the end, we're not obligated to anything at this point in time, even after further review. So at the end, I may not choose to support archives. I may choose to put all my nickels in the city record side of things. So, but I'll support the motion as it sits now.
Councillor Box.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's the thing that I'm struggling with right now, is the fact that I see both sides of it, because it's a large financial implication that we would have with going with this option. However, I am in support of it because it is just analyzing it further, trying to figure out what these options look like in the second quarter of 2022. I'm not sure if I had to make a friendly amendment about this, but something that I would really like to see during the analysis is more public consultation on this. I think there was very small amount of public consultation we did get on these matters, and I think that it's worth it to address the public a little bit further and get a larger sample group involved, because it's easy for us to say that this is important to our community. But without knowing how many people actually feel like archives is a huge part of our community, I think that that's something worth exploring a little bit further in this motion, but I'm not sure if that's a friendly amendment or just a comment to staff.
Was that already a consideration of staff? Was that the process?
Through the mayor to Councillor Blatz, can you just repeat that last part of the question? My apologies.
My question is basically, does it have to be in the motion that I would like to see more public consultation in order for us to go forward with the analysis, or is that more of just a comment to staff that in your analysis, I would like to see more public consultation?
Through the mayor to Councillor Blatz, the amount of consultation that was done both on the stakeholder side and then through the survey, from my opinion, was significant. I think where council might be having a disconnect though is that it was not a random sample. So it was not necessarily representative of the entire community. If council wants to go to that level of stakeholder engagement, I would ask for that in the motion, specifically the random sampling piece, because it's most likely will be a budget request.
I'll figure out how that would read. By pursuing option 2 with public consultation as per the report.
It's adding to the motion, so we'll vote on that amendment. So to the amendment of including public consultation, any discussion? Councillor Billingsley.
So what exactly are you looking for in public consultation that hasn't been done before to be added to this?
Essentially because as Paul said, that it wasn't a random sampling. I think that I would like to see a larger amount of our community being consulted on this rather than just a couple people that decide to go on the website and look at the survey and answer it, because I feel like the only people that would answer it are people that already have a vested interest in the archives. And so I would like to see a larger part of the community, kind of like when we do our budget open houses, something similar to that, where it's actually saying, hey, we have this huge ask for budget. How would you feel about us spending this amount of money on archives? And is this important to you and our community?
Okay, thank you.
To the amendment.
Just as we're speaking about the consultation, I just want to make it clear, because when you look through the plans and who they were in that 204, that's not necessarily random just on the website. There was, because prior to this, there was a group of us who were meeting with Paul monthly and selecting people that we knew that we used it. So most definitely that sample system went into people who use archives specifically in that. I question telling them how to do their samples. I'm just having problems with that because I thought it was a good sample system. So.
Councillor Nielsen.
Again, I concur. I think that going to the public, simply saying, do you think we should spend money when we don't know what the money dollar value is may not net us anything fruitful. People may change their minds when they think that they have to spend $500,000 versus $100,000. I would like to see us do the research that tells us if we married both a full-fledged integrated management model system, what would that cost us? And what the cost of including archives as part of that would be. Then I think you have something really tangible to take to your population and say, we're looking at spending, as an example, 500,000, of which 200,000 is going to be archives. Are you comfortable spending 200,000 on archives? Then I think it's more meaningful to the person you're asking the question of, rather than just yeah, archives is important. But is it important enough for your taxes to go up? Well, that's a whole different question. So I will vote against the amendment.
We had 4 people, I think, take part in our budget consultation survey in terms of engagement within the community. So I think that given administration's ability to engage our community and get input from the community is limited at the best of times. So not putting undue, not pressure, but direction to administration, I don't feel is something worthy of their time if we're not going to get the feedback to begin with. So I think given that they've already worked through public consultation to get to that, it then comes down to council's ability to get input from your residents and business owners to see if this is something worthwhile of their time and money or not. So I wouldn't support that direction in the amendment. Anything further? We're ready for the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Defeated. Back to the motion on the floor. Councilor Billingsley.
Through the chair to administration, I guess. So if this passes with option number 2, and information came back and for whatever reason it was defeated, at that point, how much do you also need some legwork of another option, or does it then we start all over again?
You're beat me to it. I was going to ask for an amendment asking to have another option included with that, so we had a comparator.
Yeah.
So my amendment would be to add option 3, so we've got something to compare it to, and then ask administration if Q2 and a Q2 is enough time for you to bring back that information.
That's where I was going with this.
Three.
To the mayor, and just in consultation with general manager of corporate services, I think we would like to ask for an extension to the end of Q3 2022.
Okay. To the amendment. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, to the amendment. I just want to be clearly informed, I guess. Option 3 would say it's a municipal focus that may or may not include records management, but then it would potentially exclude, this is for clarification, it would exclude beyond the city boundaries. So it would exclude historical, agricultural, First Nations information. We'd be
standalone, and it wouldn't mean, or wouldn't necessarily say would or would not include records management. That's what it would be for the city. Yeah, correct.
But city focused, so it would not include county materials or Musqueam materials.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
Through the chair to MNP, if I remember correctly, the municipal focus model is city records, not private records. So this is just a records management function. There would be no historical, just making sure that's clear for everybody.
There would be still some archival materials. Records from the city become archival at some point in their journey through that circle that you saw earlier. But the big part here that would have to be a part of that assessment is, what do you do with 50% of your archives? You now need to dispose of them, and I don't mean that in a literal landfill perspective, I hope, but you would have to find a place for those to go. So there is not an insignificant additional piece of work that you're asking for in that, is to understand the cost of transfer, and if that transfer is actually possible. You would have to find a place for it to go. And whether that's another one of the city's museums or a provincial archive or some other archive or back to their original owners, County, maybe a little bit easier to give them back to the county. Maybe. You may have a different relationship than other municipalities and counties that I've worked with in the past. But that would have to be a part of that analysis. I don't think you have to change the motion at all, but part of that analysis would have to be that particular item is a very important part of this option.
And I think that if the city decided to go in that direction where we are municipally focused and we don't store, offer out, or have the county or any other organization's material for record, then that's going to be up to that organization or that order of government. If the county decides that they want to keep their archived records for whatever that looks like, then that's on them. It's not onto the city to dictate whether or not they're going to keep their records or not. If they choose not to, then that would then be on the county, or it would then be on whichever organization we're holding the archived information for.
Those organizations and people may not be alive or exist.
No, I know, but I'm saying more specifically the county. If the
Yeah,
county doesn't, yeah,
absolutely. Yes, county, absolutely.
yeah, without a doubt. But then again, that's the level of service that the city is offering. And to Councillor Billingsley's point, when we've got an infrastructure deficit that we do, along with all of the other levels of service that we keep getting pressured to have, averaging one request a day is really tough for me to say, I'm going to spend $100,000 or whatever it happens to be on archives for that, where $100,000 goes a long way in any kind of other service or infrastructure deficit that we've got within the city. That's just my personal feeling on it. And I struggle with what we've had with archives. I struggle with the availability of it to the community and the value that it adds to the community too. So the reason that I chose 3, if we're going to compare the Cadillac to the Pinto, then if we land somewhere in the middle, that's fine. Or if we don't, that's also fine. But to have administration come back in 4 or 5 months and say, here's what you get for $400,000, and council says, whoa, and we've got nothing else to compare it to, then we're waiting another 4 or 5 months for us to get somewhere in the middle, perhaps. If we have them coming back with all of our options from top to bottom, and we land somewhere wherever we decide to land, given our budget coming up here for 2022, then I think that we're making a more informed decision moving forward, as opposed to rushing into something because some members in the community and more members outside of our community feel that our archives are valuable to the municipality, when maybe it is to, even if it was one person that made all of those requests, like each of those requests, to 365 people. And if 30% of those are coming from outside the community, is that money well spent coming from our budget and from our residents or taxpayers, as opposed to finding a better solution or maybe more bang for your buck, for your dollar, for your tax dollar. So that's why I went with the top to the bottom and then land somewhere in the middle if we want. Councillor Everly.
Thank you, Mayor Gandam. And I really, to council in general, I really like the idea of having both. And my idea is a little bit different than Mayor Gandam's, but for me, it's to really see why I liked when I saw as an outsider this happening was so we could learn more. And now what I call de-accessioning, going into option 3 is going to, we think archives is a pain now, maybe into option 3 is going to be something we deal with for a decade as we're trying, because you cannot just say this record, the county has to take it back because we're legal owners of it. So it's really to look into what option 3 would cost us financially and long-term results from that. So I like the amendment.
And to your point, I've been on council now for a little over 8 years. We've been dealing with this for 8 years.
Yeah.
And extremely frustrated in where we are now, 8 years later, And if we don't make a decision and move forward and accept the consequences 25 years from now, then we're going to be right where we are again. I'm going to be an old mayor sitting here wondering what we're going to do about archives in 2043. And I'm not interested in that. I'm also not interested in being the mayor in 2043. So to the amendment, I'm sorry. Anything further? Ready for the question? Those in favor? Carried. Anything further on the motion comparing options 2 and 3 being brought back for the end of Q3? Ready for the question? Those in favor? Carried. Thank you. 20 minutes, he says.
He doesn't know this group.
Oh, man. All right. Item 7C. I am going to ask that, being that we've had this information, not quite as long as the archives, but just offer maybe a high-level summary for us, and then council can ask the questions that they've got already, as opposed to going through the document, if you don't mind.
Good evening, everyone. So basically what we're going to talk about now is the facility utilization review. So in order to deliver efficient and valuable services to the community, the city engaged MMP to perform a utilization review of city-owned facilities. The objective of the review was to assist the city in making a well-informed decision on the long-term investment or divestment of these assets. So the buildings we looked at were the Civic Building, Memorial Arts Center, Vital Lake Park Hall, Drill Hall, Wetaskiwin Public Library, and then the Lynn Lawrence School, which became vacant in the summer of 2021 and was added to the scope as an optional additional space. 3 scenarios with recommendations were developed by MNP. Scenario 1 being status quo. Scenario 2, divestment. Scenario 3, repurpose. MMP recommends the city consider scenario 2, divesting, which entails divesting in the Memorial Arts Center and a civic building conditionally. We're asking council to direct staff conduct a community-wide survey on the importance of the Memorial Arts Center to evaluate the community needs. And we'd like to welcome James, Reese, Jing, and Landon to go through their findings and discuss the scenarios with council.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So I just want to confirm with the request to keep it brief, we can do the really short version, a slightly short version, or the long version.
Let's go with the slightly short version.
So what I would recommend then for the slightly short version, because you've met most of the team, I'm the new guy, but I've been sitting over there, so that's me, I'm here. We have the 3 scenarios, and what I would suggest is I can talk through what was the decision-making criteria as we did that assessment, and then where we landed and what some of those implications are, rather than going through all of the background of the project. Would that be about right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So maybe we go straight to slide 16, please. So here, Jess mentioned what the 3 scenarios are. So status quo, you always have the option to do nothing other than what you're already doing. The scenario 2 on divestment, and then scenario 3 on repurpose. Before we talk about what the differences are, let's just look at what the evaluation criteria is. Because with the city of Wetaskiwin having a portfolio of these facilities, many of them provide different functions. Some might be augmentative to what's else happening elsewhere. In some cases, there may be other competition from other facilities, private or otherwise. It's important to figure out how do you make the business case to look at the decision-making criteria. So we looked at a series of components, so financial outcomes. So that's looking at cost, both from an operating cost and some estimation on capital cost. And alternatively, if you no longer have the facility, if you're divesting the facility, what would be the capital gains or the proceeds from the sale? Looking at strategic alignment. So how does it align with the city's strategic plan? Supply and demand impacts, because some of these facilities are more, in the recreational category. It's the question of what happens if you do not have this facility. So if the city of Wetaskiwin does not have a facility, what's the impact on the community? Is there something similar? What are the demand impacts on usage of that facility? What would happen if you didn't have it? And then organization impacts. So how does this scenario impact on the city as an organization? And lastly, that community business impacts. So what would be some of the impacts to local business? So I don't think we need to go through a ton of detail on status quo. Just keep doing what you're doing. The scenario 2 divestment. So in the different facilities here, you have the drill hall, Memorial Arts Center, by the Lake Park Hall, Civic Building, Library, and Lindlorn School. So it's keep the drill hall, by the Lake Park, and the library. And by keeping the library, what we mean there is don't move it, continue with the same arrangement. It's a leased facility at the location there downtown. And then it's divesting, which means decommissioning operations and selling the facility for the Memorial Arts Center. The Civic Building conditionally, and conditionally there in parentheses is directly related to the last debate you were just having, looking at the archives, because that's where it's currently housed. So conditionally might be if you're looking to sell the building, looking for that condition where you can maintain use of that space from leasing it from a new owner. And then with regard to the Lindlorn School, it's a do not acquire. So thanks for the offer, but no, I don't think it's worth taking. Lastly, scenario 3 under repurpose. Little bit different here. It is still keeping the drill hall. It does still talk about divesting the Memorial Arts Center, keeping the by the Lake Park Hall, divesting the Civic Building. And here is not conditionally, because this scenario would have acquiring the Lindlorn School and repurposing. So you could perhaps relocate the library and the archives to the school. Caveat being, there's a capital investment required in doing so, but it's a scenario nonetheless. So those are kind of the 3 scenarios. If we go to the next slide and look at, what does that look like when you do some assessment? If we just focus in on divestment and repurpose, when we looked at the financial outcomes, there's kind of a 3-star rating to the divestment because there's some revenue coming in from proceeds of sale. And with the not acquiring the Lindlorn School, you're not taking on new OPEX or no new operating expenses and not a new capital investment there. And it's supportive of financial stability. And when talking, there's some conversation here about looking for some of the savings or some positive budgetary impacts. Supportive of business growth. And as far as uniting the community, also a positive rating there. Supply and demand, not a lot of impact. Yes, there is some utilization of the facilities that were being looked at for divesting, i.e. the Memorial Arts Center. It is not a large amount of utilization. And when compared to some of the competitors that we looked at, other like facilities that are within a similar vicinity, where those user groups would be using the Memorial Arts Center, there is more than enough capacity to absorb the utilization that's at that particular facility. So that's why it's rated as a supply and demand of 3 stars. It's not an impact there. Organization impacts, it's a 3-star rating simply because if you have fewer facilities to attend to, it has a net positive effect on the responsibilities of the organization. And then community business impacts, it's a 3-star rating because what we're talking about here is there with the divestment of the Memorial Arts Center and also keeping the library as is and conditional divestment of Civic Building, you're not in competition with any of the other business interests or the privately run facilities that are in place. So it's not considered a negative impact, therefore a positive impact. When looking at, if you follow the logic here that was in the divestment and, have a comparative analysis under repurpose, the 1-star rating on repurpose, the main thing here is acquiring the Lindlorn School and repurposing, is the financial outcomes might be better in the longer term, maybe, but we didn't do a deep amount of analysis on what the capital requirements are to repurpose the building. You don't have a floor plan. You don't have the all of the requirements as to what it would be to do that. So it's hard to say specifically, and it's dependent on, can you get that return on investment afterwards? I can say that the team and I, when we were looking at even what you might call Class D estimates, so a little bit further away from a wild guess, but somewhat informed, you're in the range of, because of the age of the facility and what you might need to do as far as the repurposing and reconfiguring the building, you could be in the same category of bulldoze it and rebuild it for the same cost. So in that light, when you heard from Chess as to why we're recommending divestment seems to be the path that's overall a better path that meets many of the needs. So from the business growth, United Community, supply and demand, similar type of argument that I just was explaining there on divestment. But on the organization impacts, it's a star lower because you're going to be going from leasing a facility to library to now owning and operating the facility. Similarly for what all is involved in moving the library, making some the movements with the archives, and having to upgrade on the Lynn Lawrence School. So that's why it's a lower rating. It's not as easier path of least resistance. And then lastly, on community business impacts, similarly, you're not really getting into competition factors, so the business impacts aren't there. If we just go to slide 18, we did try to put it into some quantifiable figures here. So the difference between divestment and repurpose looks like it's not very much, but there's a good old consultant's footnote in there right at the civic building where it shows up as 170,000. That is a bit of a question mark because we're guessing what may be a lease amount just based on what we're seeing for some of the commercial rates for on a per square foot basis. But it's not sold. You have no agreement. It's quite possible that while it says 170, it could also be $90,000 lower than that from an operating cost. Therefore, that difference would be much lower on divestment than repurpose. But for the purposes of this report and outlining the different scenarios, figured it's safer to be more conservative and be pleasantly surprised if it costs less, as opposed to being aggressive on what the potential savings are and then be unpleasantly surprised that that's not the case. But in both the divestment and repurpose, you can see a significant decrease in total cost from the status quo, and with divestment being the lowest cost then. Mr. Mayor, do you want us to go through any of the risks or any further information on the recommendations, or is it an assumption that council members have had a chance to read and review and maybe it's better to go into debate?
Yeah,
I just
and
want
I think they can ask any questions that they need to along the way and then move forward on that.
I'm sorry, one more time.
They'll be able to ask you questions along the way. So yeah, I don't think that you need to go through each of the risks and.
Okay, well then I'll just maybe get, if we're landing on our report saying that we're recommending option number 2, which is the divestment option, just have Reese walk through, if that was the case, what would those implementation steps look like in order to pursue that option?
Thanks, James. 24, thank you. As part of the scope of the project where we ended up with a recommendation for scenario 2, we outlined a few possible high-level implementation steps. Of course, the actual plan could be quite a bit more detailed, but the first thing we wanted to identify as we spoke with the archives project, determining what the community impact is going to be and making sure that we did stakeholder engagement by contacting user groups that were provided by city administration as to who to contact, but we did not conduct a full community-wide survey. Is our scope of this project, but it is something that would be recommended. Then the next would be based on that input from the community, decide if you will divest in the Art Center, confirm facilities that can take on the extra booking space that would not be available from the facility, and future steps for marketing and sale, informing the community and keeping them informed along the way. If the civic building was also included to be divested, determining if it was not possible to keep or lease the space in the civic building for the archives, looking for alternative space if required. And following that would be putting up the civic building for sale and eventually relocating the archives and the records management space. Again, that's if necessary. We kept that conditional caveat in there that it would make sense to keep the archives and the current semi-active records in the civic building for now, as there is an existing vault. Thank you.
So Mayor and Council, that's the scenarios and what the implementation steps look like. So that's the slightly not very long version. The presentation, you have the rest of the information there. Happy to take it and direct questions. We do have Jing Jing and Landon that were intimately involved in a lot of the detailed research and financial analysis, so we can draw upon the team to address questions as they come.
Perfect. Entertain a motion and we can get into some debate. Maybe not debate, maybe just Q&A. Go ahead.
I move that city divest itself of the civic building on the condition that the new owner will allow the archives to stay as leased space. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Karen.
But slower, please, so I can capture it.
I move that city council directs administration to divest itself of the civic building on condition that the new owner will allow the archives to stay as leased space. And I see raised eyebrows, and it's because I.
Just, well, wait until the
Okay.
motion is captured, please.
Got it.
Okay, go ahead.
My motion was intentional in that it split these two items. I didn't tie them together.
Okay. To the motion.
Just double checking that it's this. Oh, sorry.
Just civic, yeah. Councillor Blatz.
I just want to make a friendly amendment to the wording where it says dispose. Can we do divest instead? Because dispose sounds really aggressive.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand any of that.
In the motion, it's reading dispose of the civic building. I want to see it say divest of the civic building because dispose is really aggressive.
Maybe they were gonna aggressively divest, so they went with dispose. Will you take that amendment?
Absolutely. I don't want to be aggressive here.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the CAO, what other city operations happen within the civic building?
Through the chair to Councillor Elliott, we currently have a bunch of storage in the facility right now. So archives is the only one actively working out of there. And then there is a lot of records and storage.
And do we house mobile equipment in there as well in the bays?
Just in the winter, we move the buses in, but knowing that they would be moved out. Yeah, at some point.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Anything else? Ready for the question? Those in favor? Carried unanimously. I'm done. Councillor Elliott.
I will move that council directs staff to conduct a community-wide survey on the importance of the Memorial Arts Center to evaluate the community needs risks.
Moved by Councillor Elliott, and a friendly amendment will change staff to administration, and we'll just make sure that.
Where is that from? Just so I can copy and paste it over. Thank you.
I just took the motion as printed.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Any discussion? Can you just bring the motion up, just make sure we're,
Oh, yeah.
please. We're ready for the question. Those in favor? Carried unanimously. Anything else? No? Thanks for your time.
No problem.
Thank you to the people in Ontario who, it's now about almost 9 o'clock. Thank you for staying with us.
Dinner is here.
Okay. I didn't catch your name, but you can share how you got through a presentation much quicker with motions. Yeah, absolutely. So if we're voting on a better presenter this afternoon. Thank you very much for your time. No pressure, Mr. Young, but how long is your presentation?
38 minutes.
Okay. Okay, we're gonna take a break.
Is
Call a recess for 25 minutes.
Is David going to sing as well, or? All right. Just consider yourself one of the family.
All right, we will reconvene. We were looking at 7D, I believe. No, 7D or 7E?
7E.
7E,
Okay. That should be.
7D, draft for the 2020 audited financial statements. Yes.
Through the mayor and council and the public. Before you are two gentlemen from Grant Thornton, Jamie Young and David Downey, and they will present the 2020 draft consolidated financial statements.
Perfect. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for waiting. I apologize for the delay. Whenever you're ready.
So, start with a couple of documents here. And I'm just going to quickly run through the audit strategy results. So, you know, you just listen if you like. This will be a very brief conversation.
Mike, please. Make sure it's on, please.
We good? Okay. So obviously today we're bringing you up to date on the status of the December 31st, 2020 audit, which is substantially complete. We're in the final phase. All we need to finalize this will be a signed management rep letter, which we brought with us. We will need your approval on the statements, and Mr. Downey has to document the last of the subsequent events up until the time the meeting closes today, and then we're good. Inside this document, which is lovely bedtime reading, It will outline the approach that was taken in the conduct of the 2020 audit. And it will show you the areas that we focused on that are basically related to risk. And those approaches are documented in detail in Appendix A and B. Outside of that, we do indicate in the report to the audit committee that basically there are about 3 areas that are part of our main focus. One is fraud risk from management override, and it's a presumed risk as part of our audit. And it basically has to do with the fact that a senior person can draft and post a journal entry. And at the end of the day, based on the audit tests that we conducted, we're happy to report that no issues were noted as a result of the audit procedures that we undertook related to this matter. There's another area of focus, which is called fraud risk from revenue recognition. It's a presumed risk in fraud related to revenue for basically all the entities that we subject an audit to. And again, based on our testing, no issues were noted as part of the audit procedures that were conducted. The other area that we're mandated to focus on is basically accounting estimates. This can relate to the collectability of receivables, the useful life of your property like buildings, vehicles, equipment, the amount of accrued liabilities at the end of the year, contaminated site liabilities, along with landfill closure and post-closure costs. And again, we reviewed in this instance management's estimates, and we concur with the findings that management made in the accruals that were booked on the results of the city this year. There's a report in this analysis for you folks. It talks about some misstatements that we found as we made our way through the audit. At the time, there were about 5 particular items. It was the surplus at the time was understated by $247,000. Management has posted all 5 of these entries, so they're in the books and records as they exist right now. We're just responsible to report that to you folks. There are approximately 3 unrecorded items that are on the books. One is a carry forward from last year, and there were 2 new entries that were found. And again, reporting back to you folks, there was an asset overstatement of about $386,000. There was a liability understatement of about $457,000. There was an opening adjustment of about $396,000. That was an understatement. And at the end of the day, the current year net surplus is overstated by about $467,000. But the only thing related to the 2020 year is $71,000. So that was just an adjustment that could have been made in the books and records, but it was determined that it was immaterial to the results. The numbers will be picked up at a later date.
Could you stop there a minute? Can we ask a question? You said there was an opening balance adjustment of how much, Jamie?
So $396,000.
And where did that come from?
So that would have been every year that an entity is audited, whether it's the city or any other particular entity. Different times we'll come in and we will track where there could be an adjustment to the financial statements. And in the past, we had determined that there was about $396,000 that could have been tracked differently. However, management made a decision not to report those entries. And we feel, based on a materiality number that the city operates within, that it doesn't change the decisions that are made on that particular financial statement. So we're allowed to carry it forward into a new period.
So it isn't dollars that have simply been thrown into the mix to
Yeah,
balance
it's
off
just
the-
a difference in reporting from, was it reported in a 2019 year versus a 2020 year? It absolutely is reported.
Okay.
The numbers have been reported. It's a question sometimes of timing
Where?
as whether it should have been in
Yeah.
this year versus a different year.
Thank you.
The other reportable matters that are in the report to you folks talk about internal controls. And basically, as part of our audit, we obtain an understanding of the internal controls that are used to develop your financial statements. We basically do not express an opinion on those internal controls. However, our governing body requires us to bring forward any possible recommendations we can make to you on internal control findings that we've done. There has been a report that has been drafted and addressed to management for your guys' review and approval. The final two items under reportable matters are, we do in the appendix F to this document, talk about cybersecurity, which continues to be an ever-growing issue. And so there's some commentary around threats and how organizations can improve their cybersecurity. And then lastly, I am to report to the audit committee every year whether we are deemed to be independent from the organization in order to be able to issue an audit report. And based on our findings, we believe that yes, we are independent and can provide the opinion that you're asking for in your audit report. And lastly, for your finance department, there's a technical update session where we outline future accounting and audit things that are coming down the pipeline, which if they want to get a head start on it, it's there for their review. So the only other thing I would like to touch on is Appendix C is actually the draft independent auditor's report. And of course, the opinion paragraph in Appendix C is what you want to hear from the auditors. And the good news is that in our opinion, the accompanying consolidated financial statements present fairly in all material respects the consolidated financial position of the city of Wetaskiwin as at December 31st, 2020. So we are giving you a clean or clear audit report. So
Have we ever had one of those before?
They have always had one of those, to my knowledge, but I only go back to about 1993. So if you were now to turn to, you can either follow along on your computers or you can follow along with the copy that I've put before you, but we're going to start on page 5. So page 5 is your consolidated statement of operations and accumulated surplus. In the far left-hand column, you're going to have your 2020 budget that was approved by council. In the middle column, you're going to have your 2020 actual results. And in the far right-hand column, you have your 2019 numbers to compare to. So from the revenue perspective, the budget that was approved called for revenues of 35.1 million for the 2020 year. I believe at the time you did the budget, you did not know COVID was coming. So the 2019 results showed that your revenues at the time that you finished off December 31st, 2019, you had recognized revenues of 34.6 million. With the changes that occurred in 2020, the revenue number dropped to $32.9 million. On the expenditure side, we then show basically expenses by segment, and your overall budget was 32.1 million for 2020. Your results came in below budget. You expended 30.1 million, and your 2019 actual number was at 29.3 million. So in order to look at those numbers, I'm going to ask David to turn to page 12, and you folks, we're going to look at your expenses by object. So it is the same budget number, the same actual number, and same comparative number, but it's presented slightly different. And so by object, your salaries and wages declined in the 2020 year from 2019 by about 12%. They came in at 11.1 million. Again, I'm going to say lots of this has to do with COVID and the lack of personnel that would be operating in places like your pool. Your contracted services came in at $4.6 million, so slightly higher than budget and higher than 2019. Your purchases from government is up from your budget, but approximate, it came in at 3.2 million compared to the 3 million budgeted. Your materials and goods came in under budget and up from your 2019 year. Your provisions for allowance for bad debts, the budget had been set at $46,000. You went through the year, and after the finance department looked at your receivables, it was determined that there were no uncollectible amounts, so no provision has been reported in these books and records. There was a small transfer to a local board and agency. We had transfers to individuals and organizations. That number went up to 335,000. Prior years was 182, and the budget was set for 140. Again, I'm going to assume that comes back to our friend COVID. And then you had your bank charges approximating your budget, 63,000 versus 60. Your interest on long-term debt continues to drop as you reduce your long-term debt. And so that number came in at 834,000, down from the 932 in the previous year. Your amortization of capital assets, to the extent to which your buildings, your roads, your vehicles, and other equipment depreciated, came in at 5.8 million, just below the $5.9 million estimate. And lastly, there was a loss on the disposal of some capital assets during the year that were taken off the books for $50,000. And there were no other unaccounted for operating expenses. So total expenses came in at 30.1 million, below your $32.1 million budget. From there, I'll take you back to page 5 for a moment. When you subtract your expenses from your revenues before other capital money, it shows that your surplus for the year is $2.7 million. The budget had estimated a surplus for the 2020 year of 2.9 million. And both of these numbers were well below the surplus that had been achieved in the 2019 year at 5.2 million. So this is an important number, I think, to focus on when you're looking at your financial statements, because the number that falls below it is capital. And the capital revenue that you receive depends upon what's going on as far as capital work in any given year. Where the number above that, the surplus of 2.7 million, that's generally your surplus from active operations of the city of Wetaskiwin, irrespective of capital projects. So, but that being said, municipal standards require us to bring the capital funding into the books. So there was $1 million that was received. The budget had only provided for $68,000. So either there was an intent that there was not going to be a lot of capital spent that year, or the intent was that we weren't counting on very many external dollars. So when you take in your government capital monies received, you then end up with an excess of revenue or a surplus of 3.7 million, which is greater than the budgeted $3 million. And it is down significantly from the 2019 actual, which was 8.1 million. But again, in 2019, you realize significant government monies related to capital. And that number is going to change year over year over year, depending upon what you have on your agenda. Below the excess of revenue over expenses, we began the year with a surplus of $139,732.21. So $139,732,021. The administration then decided that there were some older receivables and some other items from in the days gone past. When they went through their financial records, they felt that those items should be removed off the books. So they've done a prior period adjustment to make those financial adjustments back into a previous period. And that's removed $213,000 from your accumulated surplus. So we have to show the restated number at $139.5 million. We add the $3.7 million surplus from 2020, and it means you end the year with an accumulated surplus of $143.2 million.
So the 213,803 bad debt?
No, sorry. They were adjustments, I think, that had felt that some of these assets on the books should have been removed at an earlier point. I don't know, Alan, if you want to speak to it, or Dave?
So through the mayor to the councillor, yes, they're essentially just, they are issues that we found when we were doing our research that should have been reflected in our prior year. And because they're material enough, we wanted to make those changes before we did anything with the 2020 books.
Okay. So and of course, the other thing to note, or I just bring to your attention, you may realize this anyhow from past presentations, but when it comes to the budgeted surplus, often, people say, well, we should be balanced for a zero. Well, in reality, you guys do have capital debt payments that have to be made. And in order to make a debt payment, you need to have a profit in order to do so. So anyhow, I think different times, it's just incumbent upon me to come back to the fact that, hey, you budgeted for $2.9 million surplus. You'll see in a moment One of the reasons for that is because you also had to make debt payments that were scheduled for the 2020 fiscal year. So with that, I'm going to get you to turn to page 7. And we're just going to quickly go through your statement of cash flows. So the statement of cash flows, most people can understand it because it goes back to money into a bank account. And at the end of the day, from running the operations of the city of Wetaskiwin, you generated, after you paid your bills, positive cash flow of $12.2 million. So general operations realized a profit of $12.2 million in cash. Of course, that cash is not on hand at the end of the year because there are various outflows. The first outflow is that you did purchase capital in the 2020 year. So capital being whether that's a building, whether it's a road, whether it's a vehicle, whether it's equipment. We spent $2.5 million. We then transferred $1 million from the bank account that was used to settle general bills, and that was sent over to your investment account. So that money went across into the investment account that we'll look at in just a few moments. And then lastly, $1.8 million in cash was used to settle the principal portion of your debt obligation in the 2020 year. The net result is when the year had finalized, you did, however, have additional cash of $6.7 million. That cash is in your bank account. So we began the year with $11.8 million. You ended the year with $18.5 million in the bank. If you go to page 4, this is where we start with what used to be called the balance sheet. We call it the statement of financial position now. And so at the very top of page 4, the first item in the 2020 column is cash and cash equivalents, so bank accounts. The city has $18.5 million in the bank account as at December 31st. That's up from the $11.8 million that was there in the previous year. And obviously what we just showed in the schedule as how did you go from 11.8 up to 18.5 million. On the next, the next asset on the financial assets is basically taxes. So you've got your taxes on the books for $2 million. You have some local improvements on the books as being receivable for $43,000. And then you have your trade and other receivables, which includes grant applications that have been either submitted or in progress and estimated at a total of $10.3 million. Land held for resale did not change during the year because you did not sell any land in the 2020 year. And then lastly, the investment number is at 5.2 million because we saw a moment ago that we had a transfer go from our bank account over to the investment account that brought us to 5.2 mil. So the total financial assets of the city, things that can be turned into cash relatively easy, gives you a total of about $36.9 million. So from here, I think I'd like to go to page 17, David, note number 4. And so in note number 4, I just wanted to highlight that although you guys have invested $5.2 million in investments on behalf of the city, the actual market value of those investments is $5.4 million. So it's growing as a result of I think the biggest thing potentially right now is the change in interest rates. And as interest rates rise, I think you guys are doing better. The results here as well, at the very bottom of that note, if you don't remember, council has designated the funds in the above for the landfill closure and post-closure liability. So I guess the good news item here, or two good news items are, one, our fair market value is greater than our cost. So our investment's worth more than what was originally put in there. And secondly, at a cost of 5.2 million and a market value of 5.4 million, at this point, that investment is actually higher than the entire landfill liability that you have estimated for its closure. Even though we haven't accrued all of that liability, you basically have that liability fully funded. So from here, I'm just going to bring your attention to note number 3, since we're on the page. And the reality here is the allowance for doubtful accounts in note number 3 in the prior year was $338,000. When your finance department went back and went through the taxes that are outstanding, they decided that there were more taxes that were collectible than that had been previously allowed for. So that allowance has dropped, which presents a positive financial result for the city. So from here, I am going to turn the page to page 18, and we'll look at note number 5, which is called deferred revenue. So deferred revenues are monies that the city receives, sorry, but they must be used for specific purposes. And so from an operating perspective, when administration put your financial statements together this year, on an operating side, it was determined that was $2.2 million of funding that had been received or receivable, but that had yet to be expended. And so we show that as deferred revenue until you undertake the project. That's from an operating perspective. On the capital side, a year ago, we only had deferred revenues of $340,000. Well, this year that number comes in at $5 million. So what will happen is that money will come into income in a year in which you expend those capital dollars. And again, those dollars are generally monies that have either been deposited in the bank or are showing on your statements in accounts receivable. And of course, there's a number of them that are in accounts receivable this year, and that's why your accounts receivable number is so much higher. Note number 6, there's not a lot of excitement there. Basically, there's a very small change on your accrual from one year to the next, but it remains relatively consistent at $240,000. If we turn the page to note 7, this is our provision for the landfill closure and post-closure. So we disclose both in 2020 and 2019, the estimated post-closure costs in 2034. We add into that the post-closure costs of 1.9 million. So the estimate is that the closing of the landfill will cost you in the neighborhood of $4.5 million. A year ago, you had actually provided for $3.6 million, which meant we still have a provision of about $859,000 in liabilities to bring in over the next 14 years. Well, your 1/14 of that number turned out to be $61,000, and that's the provision. That is the expense that has been incurred on your financial statements this year. The landfill has recognized $61,000 in expenses related to its closure upcoming in 2034. For information purposes, note number 8 has not changed from the past. Basically, your books and records continue to record an estimated financial liability of $120,000 related to the old battery facility. If we turn the page to page 20 and we look at note number 9, basically your long-term debt in this note has gone down. A year ago, you were at 24 million. You've reduced your debt liability to 22.2 million. And in the information below, you'll see that you're scheduled to make in 2021, which is almost at its conclusion. By the end of 2021, you will have spent $1.8 million reducing your debt even further. And of course, you would have spent about $801,000 on interest. Again, the interest number continues to decline as your debt reduction strategy follows through. As far as interest rates are concerned, some of your borrowings are at 2.18% and some of your borrowings are at 6.38%. And of course, every year you'll either add or subtract from that depending upon whether a new debenture comes on or goes off the books. On note number 10, we disclose the debt limits that are available to the city. So your actual borrowing capacity in 2020 declined because the borrowing capacity is a function of your revenues. So if your revenues decline, in municipal affairs says you cannot borrow, you can only borrow what your revenues will allow you to service. So your total debt limit this year was calculated at 49.3 million, down from 51.9 million. The total debt load that you're carrying that we just saw in note 9 was 22.2 million. So therefore your borrowing power is down slightly in 2020 and it sits on the books at $27.1 million. They present this in a secondary fashion saying on an annual basis, municipal affairs will allow you to make debt payments of $8.2 million per year as a municipality. Your current debt servicing payments that we just talked about in note 9 are $2.6 million. So municipal affairs is saying the city could borrow and could make additional debt payments in any given year of $5.5 million. And I just happened to look back I looked at the statements 10 years ago, And 10 years ago, the city was only able to borrow about $14.4 million compared to the $27.1 million. And that's a combination of the debt limit is increasing faster than your total debt obligation. So that would be potentially a good thing. Now we'll go back to page 4. And I will bring you up to speed on all of the items we just spoke about. So back on your balance sheet. So we talked about the financial assets being 36.9 million. Your financial liabilities, the payables and accruals as defined by the finance staff at the end of December came in at $3.5 million. So up from the prior year. The deposit liabilities is very similar year over year at 822,000. The deferred revenues we spoke about it a minute ago, they're up significantly at 7.3 million. But again, you can't spend it. You can only spend them on required purposes. And until that purpose has been undertaken, they sit on the books as deferred revenues. Your employee benefit obligation, again, very similar at 240,000. You'll see that the provision for landfill closure went up by about 60 grand this year. And then lastly, your long-term debt has declined from 24 to 22.2 mil. So your total liabilities come in at 37.8 million. Your assets come in at 36.9 million. The net financial debt, and so this is a presentation, I still think of it as new, but it goes back a number of years now. But the reality is the net financial debt, so the liabilities being in excess of the assets, is under $1 million. So obviously that's down from the 7.9 million a year ago. And again, I just happened to look back 10 years ago. 10 years ago, the net financial debt of the city of Wetaskiwin was $12.8 million. So you have reduced your financial debt in the last 10 years from a deficiency of 12.8 to a deficiency of less than $1 million. So that's partially where the surpluses have gone in the last number of years. So then the the balance sheet after that point now goes back and includes the tangible capital assets. And so again, years ago I'll pick on Councillor Elliott would have been around back in the day when the tangible capital assets were included they were included up at the top of the page, and they partly misrepresented the statements because the number for tangible capital in a municipality is so high, it always puts your assets in excess of your liabilities. So this was a big change when it came about, but in this case now, the non-financial assets, so your bricks and mortar, it's your land, it's your building, it's your vehicles, it's your equipment, it's coming in basically at $144 million. And so the 144 million to the $1 million net financial debt leaves us with an accumulated surplus of $143.2 million. But again, that's a harder number to understand when you're just looking at the asset number because of the roads and the buildings and the equipment that is owned by the city of Wetaskiwin. So where I'd like to go from here is to page number 9 and just to explore that equity. So Schedule 2 is a consolidated schedule of changes in accumulated surplus. So the very first column is what we call unrestricted surplus. I guess I sometimes call it, it's the money that's available for management and council's discretionary spending. It doesn't have a fixed address. It is just a general accumulated surplus was a word we used to use in the old days as well. So we began the year at 5.9 million. We talked about the prior period adjustment of 213,000. Well, that took that surplus down to 5.7 million. Well, what happened during the year? In 2020, we add to that surplus based on the revenues over expenses in the year, the $3.7 million, which is both operating and capital. We then transfer $10.7 million out of the unrestricted surplus. It moves over to what we used to call reserves, or they call restricted surplus. You then used $103,000 of the surplus in order to fund some new capital projects at the city. The reserves had carried about $1.1 million in them, that were related to projects that you undertook on an operating basis this year. And because you did those operational decisions, the reserve sent the money back to cover those expenses in the unrestricted surplus. We then, the next line, although it doesn't affect your surplus, it is reserve monies that you had set aside to be used for capital projects. So in the 2020 year, we removed $1.4 million from reserves, and we turned that into $1.4 million of capital assets that again formed part of the land, buildings, and equipment of the city. We now have to take that earlier you saw in our statements where we added the government money in for capital projects as part of your surplus of 3.7 million. Well, they first give it and then they take it away and they move it over to capital. So it was never the intention that that $1 million was to form part of your discretionary spending. It was always for capital items. So it then comes out of the discretionary spending pool and moves across to capital. And so we spent $1,052,000 on capital items. Again, we have to recognize that some assets were sold at a loss. So they have come back, they've come out of your equity and capital assets. They come back into the unrestricted surplus pool. The annual amortization expense is a non-cash item. And so that comes out of the, or it gets added back into the unrestricted surplus. And then lastly, we make our debt payments. You have to make your debt payments in a year. That comes out of the surplus. And so at the end of the day, at the end of December 31st, 2020, the discretion, what I call the discretionary spending pool, has been reduced to $2.9 million. In the column next to it, you will see that your reserve fund or restricted surplus, you began the year at 10.6 million. You ended the year with a reserve balance of $18.7 million. And perhaps we can go back to page 22, David, and we'll look at the reserve transactions that were happening in this calendar year. So in note 14, you have your opening balances, the things that were available at the close of business, December 31st, 2019, whether it's the equipment pool, whether it's wastewater, whether it's solid waste, contingency, stabilization, all of your reserves totaled about $10.6 million. In the 2020 year, you added $10.7 million from your surplus into the reserves to be used for specific purposes at a later date. And of course, then there's the decrease column where as you undertook either a capital project or an operating project where you had previously provided money in reserves, you have said, we are going to take some of these reserve monies back into general operations and capital to fund our operations and to fund capital purchases during the year. And between our additions to the reserve and our subtractions from the reserve, we ended the year with $18.7 million in what I used to call the reserve accounts. And obviously the biggest ones include your your water and wastewater, which has a reserve number of $6 million targeted to a project. I believe it's on the horizon. You have your contingency account to allow you to deal with, I believe, unforeseen events at $1.8 million. And you have $2 million in a stabilization reserve. And like I say, those are three of your top reserve numbers making up your $18.7 million. And the really, I mean, and I guess on one level, a positive can also be seen is that your reserves are fully funded. In essence, you have the money in your bank related to all of these allocations for future spending, which is generally not the case. Most reserves are, often reserves are actually underfunded. Your reserves are fully funded. The money is basically there to do the required things that you want to do in the future. From there, I'm going to go back to page 4 just to summarize your balance sheet. So at the end of the day, the statement of financial position outlines your financial assets. So financial assets plus your non-financial assets, less your liabilities, says the accumulated surplus of the city is $143.2 million. Again, what I'd like to build on is, in essence, your bank account at 18.5 million. well, it doesn't fully fund. Your reserves came in at 18.7 million, so I'm off by a 0.2. But the reality is you have 18 million in the bank. You have a reserve balance on your books of 18.7 mil. If you were to collect all of your receivables, that would total about $12.4 million. That $12.4 million would settle your accounts payable, your deposits to your tax base, your employee benefits, and your deferred revenue, which only total 11.9 million. And lastly, your investment account at 5.2 million satisfies the landfill obligation of $4.5 million. And that would be your balance sheet. Now, what I'll do is go and just cover a couple of notes that we have not touched on. And so if you go back to page 24, I won't go through this, but I'll leave it for you. It is your income statement excluding it's your income statement excluding capital. And at the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see that familiar $2.7 million surplus. It is now broken down by segment. And so it's there for your review. On the page 25, it is the same information, but for the prior year. So your profitability by segment. On page 26, we disclose trust funds that you folks administer on behalf of others. And in note 17, of course, we have the salary disclosure that is mandated by municipal affairs. So that's for your information. On page 27, we disclose information regarding the local authority's pension plan. I think the most important thing to note on this note is at the very last line. As at December 31st, 2020, the local authority's pension plan reported a value of its assets of 53.6 billion with an actuarial surplus of 5 billion. So again, the good news is Councillor Elliott may remember back in the day when the LAPP was underfunded and the city actually had to make a very significant financial contribution on behalf of its employees. And the good news is, based on the way the money's being managed at this point, it would appear that, at least on the horizon, that is not going to be a necessity. Commitments and contingencies just outline that you have entered into some lease agreements for 2021 and 2022 that will have to be, obligations will have to be fulfilled. Note 20 is contingencies. It does acknowledge that the city has been named in a number of lawsuits. But at this point, management has estimated that there is likely to be no material loss materializing from those lawsuits. And so at this point, we have not accrued anything on the financial statements for a payout because they're deeming there not to be a payout. And then notes 21, 22, 23, and 24 just round out the disclosures. And obviously note number 23 is making reference to the fact that council and management have approved the financial statements. And of course, you haven't done that, and that's why they appear in draft before you today. And so I don't know if I met my 38 minutes or not, but hopefully I was close.
Although she was a very busy counselor, she probably keep up with me.
Nobody can.
Yeah, agreed. We will get that amended.
Sure. No. Accept as information.
See?
Principal and interest payments paid on debt for the next 5 years. In 2021, we will pay $2.671 million. Next year will be $2.670, and in 2025 will be $2.124. So close to $5
So I would suggest that it absolutely enters into your deliberations. Probably the bigger question is what other borrowings are you undertaking as you make your way up to 2025? And what impact does that new debt have on, oh, not doing anything, eh? Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Jamie, we can take these with us.
Well, I do have a question. On number 14, under restricted surplus, $501,000 was decreased through the contingency reserve. That's a sizable amount. Can I get a little more information of what that may be?
Sorry, that was the 501?
Yeah. Any idea?
Sorry, Dean, where are you at?
Page 22, number
Note
14.
Yeah.
$501,000 taken out of the contingency.
Oh, okay, I got you. I'm going to defer. I don't know, Dave,
Sorry,
off the
guys.
top of your head.
Through the mayor, not off the top of our head. Again, we can look into it and get back to you, but off the top, I don't know. I'll have to have a quick look.
And I'm gonna guess with the water and wastewater, it's 1.1 million. I'm gonna guess probably the 1 million of it would be for the consultation of the wastewater treatment plant. Is that fair to say?
Again, it may be fair to say, but I have to double check.
Okay.
Is your mic on while you're asking those questions, Councilor Williamson?
Yes, it is.
Perfect.
Shocking, huh?
I think, is there anything further on this? Councilor Nielsen?
And there may not be a definitive answer here, Jamie. Given our budget numbers, revenue expenses, what is a reasonable surplus to carry to see at the end of any? Because like you started by commenting on the need to ensure you've got debt, money to cover your debt. But then beyond that,
yeah,
what should I as a counselor be expecting?
Yeah, and I don't think there's a definitive answer
Yeah.
to that question. I think it will depend on your philosophy per se. And the analogy I could draw for those of you that know Todd Beefus in our office, Todd would be a spender. He lives for the moment and his money goes freely to the things that he wishes to partake in. Jamie would be more of the saver. And so in that regard, Councilor Nielsen, it would be Jamie would be the one who would be saving for tomorrow and who would be building up a reserve or building up a surplus because of the way that I operate, where somebody else is maybe going to say, well, no, let's lower the impact to the community, to the tax base, and let's just live in the moment and not, and yeah, it's kind of a totally different mindset. And I don't think there's a right or a wrong.
Okay, so then how do I talk to residents who say, I've looked at your books, you're sitting on a couple $1 million that you overcharged me this year in taxes.
Yep. So
I can talk not as eloquently as you about, being a saver and
Yep.
saving for the rainy day and setting your money aside. And the resident says to me, charge me when you need to charge me, but don't charge me before you need to charge me. How do I respond to that?
Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, from my perspective, the clarity comes in note 14 that Councillor Billingsley was referring to. To me, again, I'll go back to the $18 million in cash. You do have $18 million in various items listed within the reserve. And to me, what I've always maintained in my presentations to council over the years is, to the extent that you have a purpose for the money, then I think that allows you to have an explanation to your residents in conversation. And so, again, the question would become, if you've got a plan on how the equipment pool money of $1.7 million is being spent on an annual basis, and how this comes into play, that helps you answer that question. If there was $18.7 million in a contingency fund, if I'm brutally honest, I'll say that would be a harder thing for you to define, because there's maybe not any specific purpose other than, well, we don't know yet.
And that, to me, that speaks to the unrestricted reserve.
Yeah. So the unrestricted surplus in this example was, I think I said at the end of this year, it's $2.9 million, if my memory is correct.
Correct.
So again, I guess there's nothing to say that somebody couldn't stop you on the street and say, well, we've got this surplus, it's just available for general spending. I guess in theory, they could say, well, maybe we could have paid a lower tax. It's a reasonable representation from somebody. However, then it's a matter of, you're saying, in this case, if we look at your spending, a year ago, that number was 5.7 million. In 1 year, it fell to 2.9 million. So again, that's where I think it's incumbent upon your finance staff to take your budgets and to project out into the future to see what is the impact of the budget, what is the impact of the capital spending that you have planned. And again, in the most recent past, if my memory is correct, I'm going to say you've done a tremendous amount of capital spending out of your own money. And once again, I think somebody can disagree with that. I'm going to say Jamie Young, by principle, in the way that I operate my own household finances, that's totally how I operate. I don't buy it unless I have the money. Again, I'll pick on Todd Beefus and say he would just borrow the money. And so again, what's right and what's wrong, I don't know that there's an answer.
Thank you.
I don't know if that helped or I just went in
Well,
circles.
it may poke some other questions coming during budget.
Anything else? Ready for the question? Those in favor? Carried. Councillor Billingsley, I would ask that you make a motion as a formal information request of administration to look into that contingency expense.
Actually, I'm okay. It'll come forward at budget time anyway, right?
It depends on the level of a breakdown that you want.
Okay, and I will make a motion to direct administration for clarification on items in the restricted surplus on the audited financial statement of 2020.
You like that for budget?
Sure. So by 2 weeks before budget. That's in February, I guess, isn't it? Second week in February, is that enough? Okay.
So January 24th, yeah. You say that motion one more time, please.
January 24th. Is that your motion there, Councillor Billingsley? Okay, Councillor Elliott?
I'll wait till after the vote. Okay, I just would like to make a comment and thank Jamie and Dave for waiting for so long. And I've said this for many years, but I just really appreciate the way Jamie brings the audited financial statement and makes it interesting, and he shares it with energy, and you're usually quite quite precise in things. So I appreciate that very much. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Agreed. Thank you. Ready for the question? Those in favor? Carried. 7E. There we go, 7E. 2020 audited financials.
Are there any more or are we done? Finance.
We just voted on that.
This was the added agenda item.
That was the other RFD for approval. Oh. Okay. So are we looking for council to approve the audited financials as well? Okay.
Are we going to speak to it or we're just going to approve the audited financials as presented?
There was an RFD for it, wasn't there?
This is the added agenda item. Just, are David and Jamie good to go?
Yes, they are. Yeah. You can stay there if you want.
Everybody's wondering what's going on here.
Thanks,
Thank you guys very much.
Thank you, sir.
So thank you, Mayor and Council. So based on the presentation that Jamie and David have put together, we are recommending that Council receive and approve the 2020 audited financial statements.
Through the mayor, if I may, as amended for the items noted in regards to the council remuneration. So for that to be from 2019 to be updated. So that was the one item that was noted. And there's some little formatting issues that have to be changed, but we can catch those ones on that. But that would be the only item to change. I can provide those numbers for you since I have the 2019 financial statements in front of me so that everyone is aware of what that change would be. Pull up. So in regards to, there we go. The number for
what, how imperative is it that this is approved tonight and not at the December meeting?
through council, the Minister of Municipal Affairs is expecting the report tomorrow.
So my concern then is we had a 37-minute and 43-second presentation of the audited financials. On a quick look, I found one thing that was incorrect, and that's not even being able to go through the document or the rest of council having the ability to go through the document. So I don't, what risk is it then to us to approve the audited financial report when there's things that need to change, or potentially other things that need to be changed, amended, or corrected?
Through the mayor to council. Based on Grant Thornton's report, I don't believe there is any risk. They have provided a clean audit based on the statements that are here. It looks like it was just a carry forward number from 2019, which does not impact the financial statement, financial position, or the statement of operations. It's just a note of what was paid. And it was the number somehow probably has a calculation error in the formula. It was just missed when going through and comparing to the prior year's numbers.
So if there is a discrepancy or something isn't right and we present this to MA, then what's the consequences of that, or whose responsibility is it then?
In regards to my best knowledge, again, based on Grant Thornton's, it's a clean audit. But if council wants to wait until December 12th, I will just let the ministry know that it will be late another 2 weeks.
No, that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking what the consequences are if there is something else in the report that needs to be changed or amended and council's approved the audited financials as presented. I'm covering my butt. What happens if something isn't right in the report and we approve it as presented? If nothing, then I have no problem approving it. If there is potential for an issue moving forward, then that's what I want to know. If there's not, then great. If there is, then what is it?
At this time, I don't believe that there's any risk to council for approving the 2020 draft financial statements as presented, noting the change for the note number 17 for salary and benefits disclosure, such that the total for 2019 is $947,448 for the total, with the balance is adjusted accordingly. If council has that concern, I have no problem waiting the 2 weeks. The ministry has waited well past the deadline of May 30th or 31st. Another 2 weeks won't make a difference.
So again, that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking if there is a risk to council or the organization as a whole to approve the audited financial report as is.
There would be no risk to council in the sense that what's being presented to you is, as indicated by the auditors, that administration hasn't, or at least they haven't found that the two of us who weren't around when this was done have gone out of their way to make a misstatement. If there is a misstatement in it, it's totally my fault because I'm the one who did all the carry forward numbers. It was missed by the auditor when they reviewed it, and it's an honest error, which was caught, and thank you, and needs to be updated. But in that respect, there would be no a fallback on council because it's being presented to you based on a clean audit. It's been audited, and yeah, I don't believe there's any risk to councillors. Maybe a risk to me for not doing it right, but short of that, I don't believe council is on the hook.
Okay, and my point isn't just council, it's all of the organization, but that's fine. If there's no risk, then we'll carry on with the motion as presented. Somebody like to make that motion? Councillor Billingsley. Any discussion? We're ready for the question. Those in favor? Carried. Thank you. I can't hear you. What did we miss? Come out of camera? Oh, right. Thank you. Can you pull that up, please, Karen?
Yes.
I apologize. Good catch.
There we go.
May as well make the motion.
Move that city council directs administration to work on the potential land sale.
Moved by Counselor Blatz. Any discussion? We're ready for the question. Those in favor? Carried. Thank you.
I move that we adjourn.
Moved by Counselor Blatz. Those in favor? Carried. Thank you.
What about my request? No, I'm trying to talk to her.
Sue, at what point